Hey everyone, What If Fan here, bringing you another exciting part of What If Transmigrated to a Medieval Pokémon World. You can find the fanfic title and the original author's name on my Patreon page. Make sure to check it out and show them some love. If you enjoy the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Quick update. The series What If Transmigrated to a Medieval Pokémon World is now on hold, since we've caught up with the author. So now, I need your help picking the next project for the channel. I'm currently deciding between these three fanfics. What if creating the strongest Strawhat crew by reading manga? What if Reincarnated in Bleach as Toshiro Hitsugaya? What if Reborn in Naruto World, continuation? Please vote in the poll and let me know which story you'd like to see next. I'll take the top pick and start working on that series next. Also check out my Patreon channel for early releases of all the series, where you can find all the series released one day ahead of YouTube. Alright, let's jump into it. Chapter 251, King. On Tuesday evening, the wind had scattered the clouds, and moonlight came through the ornate window of the city lord's mansion in long, still beams. Lucian finished his paperwork and let his eyes rest on the parchment portrait of Calyrex lying on the desk. Outside, a bug-type Pokémon called out once and went quiet. Inside, the candles burned steadily, and the room held the particular peaceful silence of late-night work winding down. Dragonite, Volcarona, Superior, and Kyurem rested in the candlelight, simply present. Zacian lay stretched out on a soft rug that Lucian had arranged specifically for them. Zamazenta was not in the room. A soft sound came from outside the door, and Chelsea stepped in. Your Majesty, as instructed, Calyrex's portrait has been posted at the post station outside the city. Passing travelers and merchants both know the name of the King of Abundance now. Lucian set down his pen. How have the townspeople responded? With genuine warmth, Chelsea said, the candlelight reflected in his eyes. Many of the farmers have begun praying before the portrait each morning, asking for his blessing on next year's barley crop. Good. Lucian nodded. All that was left now was to wait. If Calyrex was what he understood it to be, a being of high intelligence with awareness that spanned past, present, and future, and a genuine compassion for the people under its care, the growing wave of faith and belief being built in this city would not go unnoticed for long. A soft scraping sound came from outside the window. Lucian glanced over and caught the unmistakable shape of a large red Pokémon moving past. Zamazenta went to the kitchen again? Before he had finished saying it, Zamazenta's broad form nudged through the doorway, berry juice still visible around its mouth. It glanced at Zacian, then at Lucian, then settled itself down beside its sibling with an air of composure that might have been convincing if not for the berry stains. It began to clean its face with its tongue in an unhurried, dignified manner. Lucian reached over and scratched behind Zamazenta's ear. Zamazenta froze. Its eyes went wide. There was a little dust, Lucian said, his expression entirely composed. Zamazenta, being genuinely polite, accepted this explanation without question and offered its quiet thanks through telepathy. Chelsea cleared his throat. Your Majesty, should I deploy people to search outside the city for any sign of Calyrex? Lucian thought for a moment, then shook his head. No need. Calyrex follows its own nature. When the faith is strong enough, it will find us. It's late, Chelsea. Go and rest. Chelsea bowed and left. The room settled into quiet. Then Zacian's voice entered Lucian's mind, unhurried and direct. This slumbering town of yours. It's not like the other human cities we have seen. Lucian looked at it with mild surprise. Oh. The people here are content. And there are Pokémon everywhere, living as though they belong. In our experience, humans and Pokémon do not share space that way. Lucian smiled. In Unova, it's like this everywhere. If you ever have the chance, come and see it. On that land, humans and Pokémon are simply part of the same life. Zacian was quiet for a moment. We know, it said. The following morning, a letter arrived from Unova by flying Pokémon courier. Lucian opened it and read. the news from Kanto was good. The campaign had been underway for months, and Geralt's forces had moved through the fragmented region with decisive speed. The Altaria Corps had opened engagements from the air, Draco Meteor covering enemy positions in dense, overwhelming barrages that collapsed fortifications before ground forces were needed. The Agran Knights followed, their iron-hard bodies breaking through walls and formations alike. The first serious resistance, from the Blue Wind Principality west of Viridian Forest, had collapsed within half a day. After that, the remaining small kingdoms either pledged loyalty to Queen Rin voluntarily, or were dismantled within days of choosing to hold out. Casualties on all sides had been kept low. Geralt had followed Lucien's instructions precisely: after each city fell, stabilize the population first. Abolish the harsh systems immediately. Convey the same message everywhere. Humans and Pokémon are not masters and property, but companions. Across the Kanto region, that message had begun to take root in ways that would outlast the campaign. Children reaching out to touch a calm Oddish. Farmers working the same rows as Sandshrew. Warriors who had once regarded Pokémon as tools or threats finding, gradually, that they were something else entirely. In under 2 months, the Kanto region had been unified. Lucien let out a slow breath and felt the tension that had been sitting across his shoulders ease somewhat. The letter also contained an update from Kalos. AZ and Floette had been making quiet but steady progress. With more trainers sent in under league cover, and AZ applying direct pressure where persuasion had failed, the most obstructionist of the old noble families had stopped resisting openly. The people of Kalos were beginning, slowly and carefully, to extend trust toward the Pokémon around them. Lucien sat for a moment, then took out paper and wrote his reply. Following the unification of Kanto, assist Queen Rin immediately in establishing the Kanto Pokémon League. Form a cooperative alliance with Unova and Kalos, complementing each other's strengths and jointly maintaining peace across all 3 regions. He gave the letter to the messenger Pokémon and sent it on its way. With Elif managing Unova's day-to-day affairs and Anna leading the Pokémon League, he had no serious concerns about what was happening at home. The foundations were solid enough to hold without him for now. After lunch, he was settling back into his work when Chelsea appeared in the doorway, his face carrying an expression that did not quite match the calm afternoon. "Your Majesty. Something has happened." Lucien looked up. "What is it? Has the royal family finally made a move?" "Outside the city, Your Majesty. The fields." Chelsea's voice was still slightly stunned. "The farmland we cleared and planted just recently, it's all blossomed and come to full harvest. Overnight." Lucien went still. He looked at Zacian. The same understanding passed between them in the same instant. "He's here," Lucien said, and stood. "Who is here?" Chelsea asked, bewildered. "Calyrex. He's been watching everything we've been doing." Lucien was already moving toward the door. Zacian rose and followed. Zamazenta, still slightly sticky around the mouth from a post-lunch visit to the kitchen, fell into step behind its sibling. The group climbed the city wall quickly, and Lucien looked out across the farmland that yesterday had been green and unripe. The fields that had been planted only recently were now covered entirely in golden barley, the stalks heavy and bowed with full grain. A great harvest, arrived overnight, without explanation. The people who had gathered at the field's edge stood in stunned clusters, staring. "What is this? Am I still asleep? How did the barley grow so fast?" The murmuring moved through the crowd, and then someone made the connection. "The King of Abundance. It must be him. Lord Lucien was right. He heard our prayers." In the distance, moving at an unhurried pace through the far edge of the field, a Pokémon rode past on a magnificent purple horse. A small, distinctive figure with a large flowerbud crown, its gaze sweeping across the gathered crowd below the wall. It seemed to hear the voices, or perhaps to simply feel the warmth behind them. A faint smile crossed Calyrex's face. Then Calyrex looked up. Its eyes met Lucien's across the distance. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Calyrex and Spectrier dissolved together into the air, as though they had simply decided not to be visible anymore. Lucian was still watching the empty space where they had been when a blue light appeared directly in front of him. Calyrex floated in midair, small and composed, its bright, attentive eyes fixed on Lucian. Chelsea, standing nearby, had time to register a flash of white light before his awareness gently departed. Blue light wrapped around him, lifted him slightly off the ground, and settled him beside Calyrex in an easy, practiced motion. A moment later, Chelsea's mouth opened, and a voice came from it that was clearly not Chelsea's. "Human. Were you looking for me?" Lucian looked at Chelsea, who was unconscious and peacefully unaware of his current function as a communication relay. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Calyrex," Lucian said. "This isn't the best place to talk. Would you come inside with us?" Calyrex gave a small, agreeable nod. The Lord's Mansion dining room had not hosted a gathering quite like this before. Calyrex settled itself at one side of the table, small and unhurried, its crown catching the light. Zacian and Zamazenta sat across from it. Lucian took his seat with Kuram and the others nearby. The maids brought tea and small dishes without being asked. Calyrex looked at all of it with open curiosity. "You have gone to considerable trouble," it said, through Chelsea, who remained comfortably unconscious and would likely wake with no memory of any of this. "What is this about?" Lucian began from the beginning. Eternatus. A being that had fallen to this land from beyond the sky a very long time ago, currently sleeping but not indefinitely. When it woke, the energy it would release would cause ordinary Pokémon to become enormous and lose themselves to the power, and left unchecked, it would consume Galar entirely. "We are asking for your cooperation," Zacian said, when Lucian had finished. Zamazenta nodded firmly. "We need your strength to complete the hero's sword and the hero's shield. Together, we can face Eternatus when it wakes." Calyrex listened to all of it with the expression of someone who had already considered the matter from several angles. Its gaze moved to Lucian, and something like gentle curiosity settled in its eyes. "I have one question. How did you know about Eternatus?" Lucian was quiet for a moment. "Because I have seen the future of the Galar region with my own eyes." Calyrex looked at him carefully. A long moment passed. Then something in its expression shifted, as though a piece of something had found the place it fit. "I see," Calyrex said softly. "I understand, Lucian." Lucian was slightly startled. What, specifically, did it understand? He wasn't sure, and Calyrex did not elaborate. "I agree to your request," it continued. "I will remain here and work alongside you to face what is coming." Zacian and Zamazenta both let out quiet breaths. Zamazenta looked at Lucian. "So we make the weapons next?" "We're still missing one person," Lucian said. "Who?" "Melmetal." He turned toward Calyrex as he said it. The original sequence of events was clear in his memory: Calyrex, Melmetal, Zacian, and Zamazenta working together when Eternatus finally woke. Melmetal providing the metal, Zacian and Zamazenta transforming it with their own power, Calyrex bestowing the king's power to complete the transformation. From that, the hero of many battles forms had become the crown sword and crown shield, and together they had driven Eternatus back. After that, Zacian and Zamazenta had gone to rest in slumbering weald, Calyrex had exhausted itself and fallen into a deep sleep, and the Galar royal family had quietly stepped into the gap, claiming the credit and building a legend around themselves that erased everyone else from the story. Over the long years, Calyrex had been forgotten, its faith depleted, its memories fading, sleeping alone until the modern era. None of that was going to happen this time. "Calyrex, do you know where Melmetal can be found?" Calyrex shook its head slowly. "I don't know its location." Lucian frowned. Where had Zacian and Zamazenta's weapons come from in the original sequence of events? Something had supplied the metal. He was turning it over when Calyrex spoke again. "However, when I first looked at you, I saw a brief image of your path ahead." It paused. "If you want to find Melmetal, go to another land and find a Pokémon called Hoopa. It will show you the way." Lucian stilled. Hoopa. If he remembered correctly, Hoopa was in the Kalos region. which meant another trip to Kalos. He sat with that for a moment, then quietly accepted it. If that's what it takes, then that's where I go. Chapter 252, Meeting Zygarde Again. Hoopa. Lucian knew it well. Hoopa had its own story, a being of tremendous power that had appeared before the residents of Dahara City in the Kalos region long ago, taken food from the townspeople, and then repaid them many times over by bringing wealth and prosperity to the town through its rings. Dahara City, once a small settlement, had grown into something considerable because of Hoopa's presence. The local people had revered it deeply. Then one day, persuaded by the wrong voices, Hoopa had turned its immense power toward a demonstration of dominance, launching conflicts with other legendary Pokémon that left Dahara City badly damaged. It was not until a man named Gris, carrying a power granted by Arceus, arrived and created the prison bottle that Hoopa's destructive power was sealed away. After that, Hoopa could only exist in its smaller, contained form, its greater self locked behind the bottle, until circumstances in a later era finally helped it understand what that experience had meant. Dahara City, Lucian murmured to himself. The complication was that this era was thousands of years before the Pokémon League had been established, and Hoopa's presence in Dahara City was not guaranteed. But that was a problem with a possible solution. The Kalos region had a legendary Pokémon that distributed its cells throughout the entire region to observe and maintain ecological order. If anyone in Kalos knew where Hoopa was, it would be Zygarde. And the trip to Kalos served a second purpose as well. The region was now under AZ's management, with the abolition of slavery ongoing and the new social framework slowly taking hold. It would be worth seeing the progress firsthand. 2 purposes, 1 journey. I'll leave for Kalos immediately, Lucian said. He raised his eyes to Calyrex, sitting composed and upright across the table, then to Zacian and Zamazenta, then to Chelsea waiting nearby. While I'm away, watch Slumbering Town carefully. Don't give the Galar royal family any opening to cause trouble, and stay alert for any sign of the Eternatus anomaly. Yes, Your Majesty. Chelsea bowed. Zacian and Zamazenta exchanged a look, then communicated through telepathy in the direction of Lucian's mind. Go without worry. Zamazenta and I will remain here and protect the people of this city. Lucian was working to create weapons that would help them face a genuine existential threat. The least they could do was protect his territory while he worked toward it. Zamazenta nodded, its expression serious and steady for once. Calyrex set down its teacup with delicate precision. I have agreed to cooperate. I will remain here and keep this place stable. Lucian looked at Kyurem. He had been considering leaving Reshiram behind as an additional guardian, but with Zacian, Zamazenta, Calyrex, and the Unova garrison already in place, Slumbering Town was as well protected as anywhere on the continent. He could travel lighter. He gave Chelsea the final instructions. Manage the city's affairs, post notices to reassure the townspeople, and announce that the King of Abundance and his companions would be permanently based in Slumbering Town to ensure its safety and prosperity. Then he packed quickly, went out to Kyurem, and climbed onto its back. He raised a hand to the people below. Kyurem spread its wings, the downwash sweeping fallen leaves across the square, and carried them up and away toward Kalos. Clouds passed on either side as they flew. The wind pressed against Lucian's robes, and he looked down at the mountains and the wide land receding beneath them, his mind moving through what had been accomplished and what still remained. Kanto had been unified. Kalos was stabilizing. In Galar, Zacian, Zamazenta, and Calyrex were assembled, and the confrontation with Eternatus was within reach. Only Melmetal was missing. Once Eternatus had been addressed, the path forward for Galar would open properly. Calyrex restored to its rightful place as the true king of the region, a Pokémon League established to handle daily governance alongside it, and the royal family's grip on the narrative of Galar's history quietly, permanently revised. And if Hoopa could be brought into the arrangement, its rings would make travel between all the regions far more practical going forward. Half a day at Kyurem's speed brought them to the Kalos region. The difference from the last visit was striking. The smoke of war was gone entirely. Below, as Lucian scanned the countryside, he saw farmers working alongside Sandslash and Oddish in the fields, children in the villages playing with their Pokémon, the easy, unhurried movement of people who were no longer bracing for the next bad thing to happen. The oppressive weight that had hung over Kalos during the war, the hostility between nobility and commoner, the grinding cruelty of the slave system, had noticeably lifted. AZ was genuinely trying to change his country. Kirim landed in front of the royal palace. A Kalos knight on guard recognized Lucian before he had dismounted. "Your Majesty Lucian. Lord AZ is in council at present. I will go and inform him at once." "No need. I'll find my way." Lucian smiled, thanked him, and walked with Kirim toward the palace. He had barely passed through the main gate when AZ appeared, having clearly received word through the palace's internal network. Floed drifted beside him. AZ's face, when he saw Lucian, showed something that had been rare in it during their first meeting, uncomplicated warmth. "Lord Lucian. This is unexpected. Is everything well in Unova?" "Unova is fine. I've come to Kalos looking for a particular Pokémon. I need its help with something urgent." Lucian fell into step beside AZ as they moved toward the council hall. Once they were seated, he laid out the full plan. Eternatus, Melmetal, the hero's sword and shield, the assembled group waiting in slumbering town, and Hoopa as the remaining piece. AZ listened carefully. Then his expression shifted to something apologetic. "I'm sorry. I have never heard that name before." "That's all right. I have another way to find it." Lucian shook his head. He was not particularly worried. Zygarde was the answer to that problem. AZ smiled. "Because of everything you have done, Kalos is finding its footing again." "Truly?" Lucian smiled back. He was in no immediate hurry to begin the search. He spent the rest of the afternoon walking through the city with AZ instead, taking in what had changed. "The Pokémon League construction is underway," AZ said as they walked. Gyms, Pokémon centers, Pokémon schools. There have been obstacles, but the foundation is holding. He glanced at Lucian, and the gratitude in his expression ran deep. "If not for you, I would have made an irreversible mistake. I am sorry for what almost happened, Lord Lucian." "That isn't something you need to say to me," Lucian said. He shook his head and looked at the newly constructed building they were passing. The city had been rebuilt since the war, and what had replaced the damage was something genuinely new. On the streets, people and Pokémon moved through their days wearing expressions that had warmth in them rather than fear. AZ walked beside Lucian and watched it all with the quiet attention of someone who understood exactly how close none of this had come to existing. If Lucian had not intervened that day, hundreds of thousands of people and Pokémon in this city would have been erased by the ultimate weapons light. AZ carried that knowledge with him everywhere. "You understand what's at stake now," Lucian said. "Treat the people and Pokémon of this land well. That's all I ask." "I understand." AZ closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, the resolution in them was simple and absolute. Whatever years remained to him, they would be given to this. The next morning, Lucian left the royal city and set out across the Kalos countryside. In a dense, living stretch of forest, he found a Zygarde cell resting in a patch of undergrowth. He directed his intentions toward it, and the cell led him, through a winding, unhurried route, to one of Zygarde's two cores. The core was small. Lucian looked at it for a moment. Is this the one that will one day follow Bonnie? He had no way to know. But the thought came anyway. The core stared at him in return. Then a green light pulsed from within it, and from every direction, streams of green light converged and merged with the core, the shape building and resolving until a black and green canine form stood before him, hexagonal eyes glowing white with quiet intensity. Zygarde's 10% form. "We meet again, Zygarde," Lucian said, with a genuine smile. Zygarde was silent. Its feelings toward this human were genuinely complicated. Months earlier, one of its cores had traveled on a ship to a distant continent and witnessed everything this person had built there, people and Pokémon living as companions rather than master and tool, ordinary life made fundamentally better by the simple act of treating Pokémon as beings worth caring about. And now, back here in Kalos, the king of that distant land had come and spoken with AZ, and AZ had changed. The country was changing. Because of this human. Zygarde regarded him for a long moment, and then asked, through telepathy. "What is your name?" Lucian blinked, mildly surprised. Lucian. Lucian. Zygarde repeated it internally, quietly, setting it somewhere it would stay. "You came to find me. What do you need?" "A favor," Lucian said, his expression becoming more serious. "Another region is facing a crisis, and I need to locate a Pokémon called Hoopa. I know it's somewhere in the Kalos region, but I don't know where." Hoopa. A pause. Then Zygarde turned, and its head pointed toward the depths of the forest. "I have seen a Pokémon in a town not far from here. It may be what you are looking for. Come. I will guide you." Consider it a small return for everything, Zygarde thought to itself. "Thank you," Lucian said, genuinely surprised at how straightforwardly that had gone. Zygarde's 10% form was fast, and Lucian quickly found he couldn't keep pace on foot. He climbed onto Kyurem instead, and they traveled behind Zygarde through the Kalos landscape. Kyurem's faint chill moving alongside them without disturbing the forest around them. The terrain flowed past, dense canopy giving way to open hills, rivers catching the afternoon light, towns appearing and receding in the distance. A full day and night of travel later, they came to a stop at a small town that was, against expectations, remarkably busy for its size. Zygarde stilled, its gaze fixed ahead. "We have arrived." "Thank you." "Truly." Lucian climbed down from Kyurem. Zygarde received the thanks in silence, which was its way. Lucian was about to move toward the town when a thought stopped him. He turned back. "Zygarde. One more thing, while I have the chance to ask." Zygarde looked at him. "What is it?" Lucian chose his words carefully. "Is there a way to obtain something close to eternal life? Could Xerneas help with something like that?" Zygarde went still. After a moment, it asked, "Why do you want this?" Lucian answered without hesitation, and more honestly than he might have expected himself to. "Because I want to stay beside my Pokémon. Human life is short. If I were to die before them, they would grieve for centuries. Dragonite, Superior, Volcarona, I don't want that for them." He hadn't said anything about the larger project, the world he was building, the vision of humans and Pokémon living together across every region. What came out instead was the smaller, more personal truth underneath all of it. Zygarde was quiet for a long time. Then it asked, "If you received that kind of life, what would you do with it?" Lucian thought about it honestly. "I would keep building the world I've been working toward. When humans and Pokémon have truly found their way to living together, when that doesn't need me to hold it up anymore, I would step back. Give the throne to someone better suited for it. And then I would go somewhere quiet with Dragonite and the others and simply live alongside them for as long as there was time to live." He scratched the back of his head slightly. "That's roughly it. Though I'm aware it's a large thing to ask. I was just asking while I had the opportunity." He gave Zygarde a small nod. "I'll let you go. I have the main business to attend to." He remounted Kyurem and rode toward the town. Zygarde, in its canine form, stood at the tree line for a long time, watching the figure recede until it had disappeared entirely. Then, slowly, it turned and left. In the eternal forest. Warm sunlight came through the canopy in long, shifting beams and fell across a meadow full of flowers in bloom. Xerneas moved through them with its characteristic unhurried grace, its head bowed, its antlers catching the light in faint pulses of color. Then it raised its head. It looked in a particular direction with the attentiveness of something that had just become aware of something unexpected. "My friend," Xerneas said, its voice gentle and slightly surprised, the words directed at someone only it could perceive. "What brings you to my part of the world today?" Chapter 253, Hoopa and the Clash of Ages. Kyurem descended slowly over the town, and Lucian looked down at what was below him and stopped. This was not what he had expected. The town was not the modest, struggling settlement the surrounding countryside suggested it should be. It was prosperous in a way that had no natural explanation: exquisite architecture, streets paved with smooth polished stone, gold and silver artifacts displayed casually in front of every doorway. The wealth here exceeded anything in the towns nearby by an order of magnitude, and it had clearly appeared recently. Lucian did not need to think long about why. He guided Kurum down and continued on foot toward the center of town, where a crowd had gathered around something enormous. As he drew closer, the shape resolved: a throne of pure gold, inlaid with gems, built at a scale that suggested whoever had commissioned it was not human. When sunlight touched it, the reflected light spread across the whole town in a warm, dazzling wash. On the throne sat Hoopa unbound. 6 great arms. Multiple golden rings circling its body, each one radiating with contained power. Its eyes surveyed the kneeling townspeople below with the particular expression of something that has never had cause to consider that it might not be the most important thing in any given situation. A man in the crowd pressed forward, his face bright with fervent devotion. "Wise and mighty Hoopa, please grant us more wealth." Hoopa waved one hand idly. From the rings on its arms, gold and silver and jewels cascaded outward and piled up on the ground. The man scrambled for them with undisguised joy. Lucian pieced together what had happened as he walked. 3 months ago, Hoopa had arrived here. The townspeople had been terrified at first, naturally, but Hoopa had not harmed anyone. It had taken some food, and in exchange had produced treasure in quantities that transformed a struggling town into the wealthiest settlement in the Kalos region. The townspeople had built the throne and offered their worship, and Hoopa had accepted the arrangement because it suited its mood. All of which fit perfectly with what Lucian remembered of Hoopa's nature. He kept walking toward the throne. Kurum moved beside him, its ice aura pulled inward and quiet. Hoopa's eyes opened fully and found him. The kneeling residents looked up. A stranger was walking directly toward the throne without breaking stride, accompanied by a Pokémon that made several of them instinctively flinch. "Who are you? How dare you disturb the great Hoopa?" Hoopa, for its part, was not alarmed. It was curious. It could sense something emanating from the Pokémon beside this human, a power that warranted attention. But Hoopa had never encountered anything it considered its equal, so it narrowed its eyes and looked down from its considerable height with the expression of something assessing an unexpected entertainment. A small human, bold enough to walk into Hoopa's presence uninvited, it said, its voice carrying the specific laziness of something that has never had to work for anything. "Quite courageous, for your kind." "Hoopa," Lucian said, meeting its gaze directly. "My name is Lucian. I'm not here to cause trouble. I need to ask for your help." The town erupted in alarmed noise. Several residents shouted warnings, certain this was about to go very badly. Hoopa remained still. It looked at this human for a long moment. No malice in the aura, which was already unusual. Something else instead, something that held its attention without it quite being able to name why. "Interesting," Hoopa said, faint amusement entering its voice. "You are asking Hoopa for help." It rose from the throne, its 6 arms spreading wide, the golden rings beginning to rotate slowly around its body. "Hoopa has brought wealth to these people and ensured their prosperity. They offer burning devotion and fill Hoopa's golden throne with their faith. What exactly are you offering in return?" Lucian thought about this carefully. He remembered what he knew of Hoopa. It acted entirely according to its own desires, unconstrained by anything external. The trouble it had caused in Dahara City had not come from malice but from a moment of wounded pride, wanting to demonstrate its power when challenged. It was free-spirited, impulsive, and did not respond to conventional appeals to duty or reason. What could such a being actually want? After a moment, tentatively, he said, "I could offer you something called a donut." Hoopa stared at him. A visible pause settled over it, as though it was not entirely certain it had heard correctly. "A donut," Lucian continued. "It's a kind of dessert. Very sweet. Quite good." He had specifically had his people prepare some before this trip, remembering that the smaller form of Hoopa had been genuinely devoted to them. He was reaching into his bag when Hoopa erupted. "How dare you!" Indignation blazed around it, the rings on its arms vibrating with outrage. "You dare suggest that the great Hoopa, above all things, could be tempted by sweets?" The insult. A golden aura shot outward from one of the rings, a beam of intense concentrated energy aimed directly at Lucien. Kirim moved. It stepped between them without hesitation, opened its mouth, and met the beam with a blast of concentrated cold. The two energies collided in the air between them. The golden attack began to freeze, piece by piece, crystallizing and falling harmlessly apart. Hoopa went very still. Then real anger moved into its eyes. All 5 remaining rings launched simultaneously. 5 beams of concentrated power tore through the air toward Kirim, each one carrying the kind of force that warped the surrounding air and cracked the ground below into long, jagged fissures. The townspeople hit the ground and covered their heads. Kirim did not move from its position in front of Lucien. Lucien leaned forward slightly. Kirim had already registered what it was facing. Hoopa Unbound carried more raw power than it had anticipated, genuinely exceeding Zacian and Zamazenta. It filed this information away without alarm, because Kirim did not experience alarm the way smaller things did. Its wings spread. The cold that erupted from its body was not a targeted attack but an environmental one. The temperature dropped immediately and completely, the ground thickening with ice and a spreading ring outward from where it stood. Simultaneously, ice spikes erupted from its body in every direction, intercepting all 5 beams at once. The collision was enormous. The sound shook the horizon. Shockwaves rolled outward across the town. The gems on Hoopa's golden throne rattled in their settings. The piled gold and silver and jewels scattered in every direction on the force of the wind. In the air above the town, 2 extreme forces held each other in stalemate. Hoopa's golden power and Kirim's absolute cold, each one continuously testing the other's limit, neither giving ground. Hoopa stared at the standoff. In all its existence, its power had never been answered like this. A lone human and 1 dragon-type Pokémon, standing in its territory, refusing to yield. "Hoopa will crush you." Hoopa tilted its head back and roared. A golden aura churned violently around its body, merging with its psychic power into something that radiated in every direction at once. It swung all 6 arms simultaneously, and dozens of energy beams rained down on Kirim from every angle, sealing off every possible direction of retreat. Kirim did not attempt to retreat. Its body erupted with extreme cold, an absolute and total force that spread outward from it in every direction at once. Everything the cold touched froze. Glaciate, at full power, without restraint. "What is this?" Hoopa's voice cracked with something it very rarely experienced. The cold was reaching it, pressing inward through its aura, and for the first time in a very long time, Hoopa felt something approaching the edge of genuine danger. It was not going to win this exchange. That calculation happened fast. Hoopa gritted its teeth, its mind working quickly. If it could not overpower this creature directly, it would simply remove it from the equation entirely. It seized one of its great golden rings and hurled it downward, the ring dropping over Kirim and Lucien from above, pressing down, and activating. The space where Kirim and Lucien had been standing was suddenly empty. Hoopa exhaled heavily, its 6 arms lowering. A slow, satisfied smile spread across its face. Sent to another dimension. Without Hoopa's own assistance, they would have no way back. That was that. Hoopa, it reminded itself, was the strongest. Kalos region. Dahara City. Many years later. Night had fallen over Dahara City, and something catastrophic was happening. The prison bottle, the vessel that had contained Hoopa's destructive power for a century, had been shattered by Team Rocket's trio in a moment of careless meddling. The sealed power, carrying 100 years of confinement and resentment, had torn free and was now attempting to devour the smaller Hoopa that had lived without it, merging against its will into the enormous unbound form, all that suppressed fury given shape and direction. And it had found a target. Ash rode Latios at full speed through the city's canyons of tall buildings, Pikachu clinging to Latias beside him, a black Rayquaza keeping pace behind them. The enormous Hoopa was relentless in its pursuit, its 6 arms reaching, its rings spinning with barely contained power. Faster! Ash pressed forward, holding the small Hoopa tightly against his chest. They burst out from between the skyscrapers and over an open lake, and then Hoopa was in front of them, blocking the way entirely. Ash pulled back in shock. Latias and the black Rayquaza braked hard. The enormous Hoopa's purple aura radiated outward in waves, its eyes locked on the group. 6 golden rings rose slowly from its back, each one humming with power that made the air around it feel unstable. "You think those 3 are the only ones who can help you," it said, its voice distorted and enormous. "Watch." The first ring released a surge of deep blue temporal power, and from within the swirling energy, a vast steel figure descended. Dialga, the god of time. The second ring tore open space itself, deep purple light spilling out, and Palkia materialized over the lake, its presence warping the geometry of the air around it. The third ring produced a crimson mist, and from within it, Giratina's serpentine form emerged, its red eyes sweeping the scene. The fourth and fifth rings brought seawater and molten lava simultaneously, and from the water came Kyogre, and from the lava came Groudon, both of them enormous and ancient and entirely under Hoopa's coercive pull. The citizens of Dahara City stared upward in horror. Ash's hand tightened into a fist. 5 legendary Pokémon, all summoned at once. The 6th ring hung in the air and did nothing. Hoopa noticed. It tried again, forcing the ring to respond. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the ring activated. An intensely cold energy surged outward from within it, and a large Pokémon emerged, ice blue and black-white, 2 golden eyes, a presence that dropped the temperature of the surrounding air immediately. Kyurem drifted out of the ring and into the night sky above Dahara City. Ash stared. "That's Kyurem." Then Pikachu pointed urgently and called out. Ash looked more carefully. There was a figure standing on top of Kyurem's head. A man in clothing that looked like it belonged to a very different era, completely at ease at this altitude, looking around at the assembled legendary Pokémon with an expression of mild interest. Ash had no idea who that was. Below, the enormous Hoopa was regarding its summoned army with satisfaction. 6 legendary Pokémon, all answering to it. It opened its mouth to speak. Then it looked at Kyurem again, and stopped. Something was wrong. The last one it had summoned did not feel like the others. The others were under its control, compelled by the ring's power. This one was not behaving like something under compulsion. It was simply there, calm and cold and entirely self-possessed, as though it had decided on its own to emerge from the ring and see what was happening. A question mark formed in Hoopa's awareness. The man on Kyurem's head noticed Hoopa looking at him. He raised a hand in an easy, cheerful wave. "Hello again, Hoopa. Fancy meeting you here." Chapter 254, 1vs6. The howling night wind swept through Dahara City, shockwaves rolling between the skyscrapers, the lake's surface churning under the pressure of so much raw power gathered in one place. The sky above was dense with the presence of legendary Pokémon, the air itself feeling compressed and unstable. And then the man on Kyurem's back said hello, and everything stopped. The enormous Hoopa, consumed by a century of accumulated resentment, went completely still. The citizens mid-evacuation looked up. Ash, clutching the small Hoopa against his chest, looked up. Serena and Bonnie, further back in the crowd, looked up. "Who is that?" Serena murmured. Ash looked down at the Hoopa in his arms. "Hoopa, do you know him?" Hoopa doesn't know. The small Hoopa shook its head emphatically. It had never seen this human before. Ash stared upward. Friend or enemy? He genuinely could not tell. What had happened was straightforward enough, from Lucian's perspective. When Hoopa had sent him and Kyurem through the ring in that small Kalos town, they had ended up somewhere that seemed to exist outside of normal time and space entirely. He had been searching for a way out when a large golden light had appeared and pulled them through it, depositing them here, in the sky above a city he didn't recognize, surrounded by 5 legendary Pokémon with glowing red eyes and Hoopa unbound at the center of it all. He had taken a moment to assess the situation. Then he had waved. The enormous Hoopa, the resentment-consumed version of the creature he had met in that small Kalos town, registered the human on Kurum's back and its eyes went wild. Its body surged with purple aura, its 6 arms swinging wide, and it roared. Attack! Destroy them both! The 5 legendary Pokémon moved simultaneously. Dialga's roar of time tore through spacetime in a swirling, twisting surge that drove directly at Kurum. Palkia's spatial rend shredded the air itself, unleashing a torrent of destructive light from multiple directions. Giratina vanished into shadow and reappeared from within the ground in a shadow force that carried annihilating force. Groudon drew up precipice blades from deep beneath the earth, scorching lava erupting along their edges. Kyogre unleashed Origin Pulse, the water it controlled transforming into a devastating beam of concentrated energy. 5 ultimate legendary attacks, all at once, all converging on one point. The citizens of Dahara City below went white. Ash's group collectively stopped breathing. No ordinary Pokémon could absorb a combined assault like this. Lucian steadied himself on Kurum's back and leaned forward slightly. Kurum! Show them what you can do. Yes, Kurum said, low and certain. The ice-blue light in its eyes deepened. Its wings spread to their full span, and the cold that erupted from its body was not a directed attack but something total, an environmental absolute that froze the howling wind itself where it moved. Ice condensed from the moisture in the air in dense, sharp formations, torrential and blue. Then Kurum opened its mouth and released the beam. The roar of time met it first. Time and cold clashed with a concussive crack, the distorted spacetime around the impact point freezing solid, the temporal power diminishing and then stopping entirely. Giratina's shadow force came up from below in the same instant, and Kurum's tail swept down, ice armor forming across its entire body in a fraction of a second to absorb it. The follow-through was glaciate, directly into the shadow, freezing it and forcing Giratina out of its ghost state into solid visibility. Palkia's spatial rend reached Kurum next and froze before it could connect, the torn space itself crystallizing and holding still. Groudon's precipice blades missed entirely. Kyogre's Origin Pulse swept in from the side and was met by the residual cold field around Kurum, the beam dissipating against it without landing. In a matter of seconds, the combined assault of 5 legendary Pokémon had been absorbed, deflected, or neutralized. The enormous Hoopa stared. Its blood-red eyes filled with something between madness and disbelief. It roared again, raw and desperate, and channeled everything it had, all 6 arms moving at once, golden light churning into a single massive beam of concentrated power, the resentment driving it burning hotter than anything it had produced before. Destroy it! Completely! The beam tore toward Kurum, joined by the renewed attacks of the 5 legendary Pokémon around it. The combined force of all 6 struck the surrounding buildings like physical blows, the lake surface cracking beneath the shockwaves, frozen fissures spreading in every direction. Kurum took it. It stood in the center of all of it, its icy form surrounded by churning cold air, and did not move backward. It endured every hit without retreating a single step. Then it rose higher into the air, and went still. The cold that spread from it this time was different in quality from everything before. Not a strike or a blast but something absolute, a stillness so complete that the air itself stopped moving. Glaciate at its true limit. The cold hit Hoopa's beam first and froze it solid, the massive surge of power crystallizing in place and shattering into blue ice columns that fell straight down into the lake. The cold continued outward, reaching Dialga, Palkia, Giratina, Groudon, and Kyogre in a single expanding wave. All 5 legendary Pokémon froze where they were, suspended in the air, the resentment controlling them cut off entirely. The sky above Dahara City went quiet. Kurum turned its gaze to Hoopa unbound. Hoopa tried to run. The space around it was already frozen. It threw everything it had left into its resentment, fighting against the cold, and the cold was simply greater. Hoopa Unbound's resentment power, enormous as it was, had already met its ceiling. Kurum had not. The final beam hit Hoopa Unbound squarely. The massive body was encased in ice in an instant, the purple aura snuffed out, 6 arms frozen in place mid-motion, the arrogance and fury replaced by nothing but fear and then stillness. The ice spread completely, and Hoopa Unbound fell from the sky and hit the frozen lake surface with a crash that echoed across the entire city. It did not move. With Hoopa's resentment gone, the hold on the 5 legendary Pokémon dissolved. They hung in the air, suspended in their ice, no longer controlled, waiting. The sky above Dahara City was completely silent. Kyurem drifted in the stillness, its ice-blue form catching the dark light, unhurried and entirely composed. 1 against 6. A complete victory, achieved without retreating a single step. On Latios's back, Ash had not moved. He was holding the small Hoopa against his chest and staring upward, his body rigid, his mouth open, no words coming out. His hands were shaking slightly. He had seen a great many things in his years of traveling. He had stood beside legendary Pokémon and witnessed battles that should not have been survivable. He had never seen anything like this. That Kyurem. That trainer standing on its back, alone, had just fought Dialga, Palkia, Giratina, Groudon, Kyogre, and Hoopa Unbound simultaneously, and won without retreating a single step. Ash had traveled through Unova. He had seen Kyurem before. He had thought he understood what it was. He had been wrong. The small Hoopa in his arms blinked its wide eyes, looking up at the enormous frozen shape in the lake, then up at Kyurem in the air. Its small face was a study in bewildered awe. It pressed itself closer to Ash's chest and whispered, very quietly, so strong, even stronger than Hoopa. Nearby, Serena had one hand over her mouth. She was staring at the ice-blue form drifting in the sky above, her eyes unable to fully process what she had just watched. That combined assault from 5 legendary Pokémon and Hoopa Unbound at full power, all of it absorbed and answered and then ended, decisively, by 1 Pokémon and 1 trainer. Bonnie had both hands gripping Clement's sleeve, her face pale, her eyes locked on the sky without blinking. That Pokémon is too strong, she managed, in a very small voice. Clement pushed his glasses up, the lenses catching the faint light coming off the ice. His mind was moving, trying to build a framework that could contain what he had witnessed. It was not working very well. Latios, Latias, and the Black Rayquaza had gone entirely still. They looked at Kyurem with the particular wariness of legendary Pokémon who have just encountered something that outranks them clearly and knows it. Their bodies had slowly relaxed as the battle ended, but their eyes stayed fixed on the ice-blue figure above, not quite willing to look away. Below, the evacuation had stopped. The citizens of Dahara City stood in place, heads tilted back, staring upward in complete silence. His screaming had ended some time ago, replaced by the kind of collective stillness that comes when something happens that no one has a word for. Then Kyurem descended, carrying its trainer, and Ash remembered how to move. The trainer on Kyurem's back was looking at him with a calm, slightly amused expression. He smiled and spoke first. "Hello. Sorry to intrude. Could you tell me what year it is?" Ash answered before he had consciously decided to. "It's year 213 of the league calendar." The trainer processed this, his expression shifting briefly into something thoughtful. "I see. So I've come through a different dimension and ended up in the future." He nodded to himself, then looked back at Ash with genuine warmth. "Thank you." Kyurem settled to the ground, and the group came closer. Serena, Clement, and Bonnie approached cautiously, their faces still carrying the shock, their eyes moving between Kyurem and the trainer standing beside it with open curiosity and residual awe. Ash recovered himself properly and looked at the trainer directly. The excitement that always lived somewhere near the surface of him was already pushing through. Where did you come from? How did you end up inside Hoopa's ring?" He was already moving on to the next question before the first one was answered. "And is Kyurem yours? His power is unbelievable." The small Hoopa poked its head out from where it had been pressed against Ash's chest, its round eyes fixed on the trainer and then sliding sideways to Kyurem, whose aura was still cool and present, and whispered, "Such a powerful ice dragon." The trainer rested one hand gently on Kyurem's side. The cold around Kyurem softened somewhat, the dragon-type pressure that legendary Pokémon instinctively responded to pulling back to something quieter. "My name is Lucian. I come from the Unova region, from the past. He said it without making it sound unusual, his tone calm and grounded. The Hoopa from my time sent me and Kiram through a ring into a different dimension. We ended up here. Ash flinched. The past? So you actually time-traveled here from a really long time ago? Lucian gave a small nod. His gaze moved to the frozen shape of Hoopa unbound in the lake. The resentment has been sealed in the ice. It won't wake for some time. When the ice breaks down naturally, the legendary Pokémon being controlled will have their own minds back. The danger to Dahara City is over. He paused, then looked back at Ash. Ash, I have a question of my own. What is the current state of the Unova region? Ash blinked. Wait, how do you know my name? Lucian smiled. There are many parallel worlds. Perhaps there's another version of you in one of them. Ash took that in for a second, and then, given everything else that had happened to him in his years of traveling, accepted it without too much difficulty. He thought back over what he knew of Unova. Unova region, the champion is Alder. The Elite Four, in order, are Caitlin. He ran through what he remembered. Lucian listened, and as he did, something in his expression shifted slightly. A small frown. This was not his Unova. He turned it over carefully. Hoopa Unbound had looked at him with no recognition earlier, as though it had never seen him before. And now the structure of the Unova League Ash was describing didn't match what he knew from his own timeline. A quiet suspicion took shape. He had not traveled thousands of years into the future. He had passed through a dimensional boundary and arrived in a parallel world. A different world, running alongside his own, where the same names and places existed but history had taken different shapes. An anime world, perhaps. What is it, Mr. Lucian? Ash was watching his expression with curiosity. Nothing important, Lucian said. I was just working something out. Chapter 255, The Meaning of Punishment. The storm over Dahara City gradually subsided. The ice blue that had covered the sky faded, and the ordinary dark of night returned, the wind moving again through streets that were still and cold but no longer dangerous. Only a faint chill lingered in the air. Kiram descended to the ground without a sound, its massive body settling with complete control, not so much as a ripple of dust disturbed. It lowered itself calmly, and Lucian stepped down from its back. The aura around it pulled inward, the earlier ferocity gone, leaving only the quiet, settled presence of something that was very powerful and had nothing left to prove. The small Hoopa, unable to contain itself any longer, wriggled free from Ash's arms and flew directly to Kiram's side. It raised its small, curious face and looked up at the ice dragon, then reached out one hand and cautiously touched Kiram's leg. It pulled the hand back, blinked its wide eyes, and whispered. Kiram is so gentle now. Not like before. Kiram looked down at the small creature. No hostility, no particular interest either. It simply returned its gaze to its position beside Lucian and held it there. Clemon stepped forward, pushing his glasses up, his expression still carrying the residue of shock but reorganizing itself into something more analytical. Mr. Lucian, you said you came from a parallel world in the past. How different is your world from ours? Quite different, Lucian said. He looked at the group around him and answered in a straightforward tone. In my Unova region, the timeline is several thousand years behind yours. The geography is different, the Pokémon distribution is different, the people and events are all different. He paused. I no longer think I simply traveled forward in time. I think the dimensional turbulence brought me into a parallel world entirely. A different version of the same world. Hoopa's unfamiliar eyes when it looked at him had confirmed it. In his own timeline, Hoopa knew him. This one had not. Ash scratched the back of his head, still flushed with the mixture of adrenaline and admiration that had been building since Kiram first opened its wings above the lake. Whatever world you're from, Mr. Lucian, it's a good thing you and Kiram were here. If you hadn't been, Dahara City would have been finished. I mean it. Thank you. Serena nodded, her voice quieter but just as sincere. We thought there was no way to stop it. You were both incredible. The ground trembled slightly. Lucian turned. The ice encasing Dialga and the others had begun to crack, fine lines spreading across the surface, faint light leaking through. Hoopa's resentment has been beaten back, he said. They're waking up. The ice around Dialga shattered first, pieces falling away in a cascade of blue-white shards. Dialga shook itself, the temporal energy around its body briefly chaotic, and looked down at Lucian and Kyurem from its considerable height. The arrogance from before was gone. What replaced it was something closer to apprehension, and perhaps the beginnings of acknowledgement. It let out a low sound, spread its wings, and dissolved into light that faded on the horizon. One by one, Palkia, Giratina, Groudon, and Kyogre broke free in the same way, each one pausing briefly to look at Lucian before departing. Within moments, the sky above Dahara City was clear. Lucian watched Groudon go and found himself briefly wondering, with genuine curiosity, whether it was actually going to walk back to the Hoenn region. He had heard the theory. He did not have time to investigate it. The danger was over. Around the collapsed building at the lake's edge, the evacuated citizens of Dahara City were gathering again, the sound of their voices rising from frightened whispers into something warmer. Applause. Gratitude. People calling out toward the figure standing beside Kyurem, naming him the hero who had saved the city, and Lucian received all of it with quiet composure and a small nod. Bonnie clapped her hands together, her face bright. Everyone's safe. Dahara City is safe. Not far away, the three members of Team Rocket stood in a cluster, staring. Who is that guy, exactly? Meowth managed. I have no idea, Jessie said, looking genuinely unsettled for once. But that Kyurem defeated all of those legendary Pokémon by itself. All of them. If we could catch something like that. Meowth began, his eyes going distant. Don't even think about it, Jessie said flatly. That is completely beyond us. Meowth sighed with feeling. In the dining room of an undamaged house in Dahara City, the group had gathered around the table. Lucian recalled Kyurem into its Pokeball and sat with Ash, Serena, Clement, Bonnie, Baraz, and Murray. The small Hoopa drifted near the table, occasionally glancing at the prison bottle that Baraz had repaired and placed nearby, inside which Hoopa Unbound had been resealed. Murray finished explaining the background. 100 years ago, an ancestor named Gris had used a power called the Imprisoning Force to seal a portion of Hoopa's destructive capacity into the prison bottle, containing it. Their purpose in coming to Dahara City had been to find a way to help Hoopa recover that sealed power safely. Lucian listened, his gaze resting on the prison bottle. He already knew this story. In the version he remembered, Hoopa had been unable to use its ring to escape, and facing that danger, had made the choice to put others first, and that choice, combined with Ash's support, had broken through the restriction. After that, Hoopa had been able to use both its contained and unbound power freely, and had helped rebuild the city it had contributed to destroying. So the meaning of the so-called punishment was not simply the imprisonment of power, nor was it about suppressing Hoopa's strength. It was something else. Lucian's eyes settled on the small Hoopa sitting beside the table, absently rubbing the prison bottle with one hand, its expression somewhere between confused and thoughtful. I think, Lucian said slowly, that what Gris did when he sealed Hoopa's power wasn't meant to confine it. It was meant to teach Hoopa something. Murray looked at him. Teach it what? To control its own mind. He paused. Hoopa has extraordinary power. It can summon and command legendary Pokémon, traverse space, reshape circumstances entirely through its rings alone. That kind of power, when driven by resentment, selfishness, or pure caprice, becomes catastrophic. What we saw tonight was exactly that, power without restraint, 100 years of sealed resentment given form and direction. Baraz and Murray exchanged a glance. They knew, in some part of them, that what Gris had left behind had never been intended to strip Hoopa of what it was, only to give it room to become something different. Lucian looked at Hoopa. It tilted its head, listening, its round eyes moving between confusion and something more open. The punishment was never about limitation, he said. It was about learning to hold immense power gently. To protect the people and things you care about instead of chasing whatever you want in the moment. To understand that strength is most powerful when it serves others. Serena nodded quietly, something settling in her expression. Like how Hoopa stayed beside Ash even though it was frightened. It didn't run. That was it, wasn't it? Caring for someone else even when it's difficult. Yes, Lucian said. And I think that's why Gris entrusted Hoopa to his descendants rather than simply sealing it away permanently. He wanted Hoopa to form a genuine bond with people. To learn through that bond what the power is actually for. Hoopa blinked. It looked at its other self in the prison bottle for a long moment. Then it looked at Ash, at Serena, at the quiet presence of Lucian beside it, and its small face did something complicated. Hoopa doesn't want to destroy things, it said softly, touching the bottle with one hand. Hoopa just wants to be with everyone. Moray's eyes went bright. She reached out and stroked Hoopa's head without a word. Clement adjusted his glasses, his analytical mind already working. If that's the case, then technically, forcing a merger between the two sides of Hoopa's power isn't the right approach at all. The point is for Hoopa to genuinely understand what protection means, and what its responsibilities are, so it can completely move past the resentment. That's what actually needs to happen. Exactly, Lucian said. He picked up his glass and took a small sip. I need to use Hoopa's ring to return to my own world. But for that to work, Hoopa needs to have truly mastered its own power, both sides of it, stably enough to open a dimensional portal without the resentment interfering. Ash's hand closed into a fist, the familiar resolve settling across his face. Then we help Hoopa get there. All of us, together. We help it understand what protection means, what it's responsible for, and we help it master what it can do. Yes. Bonnie's hand shot up in agreement. The small Hoopa circled the group happily, its face bright with uncomplicated joy. After the meal, everyone made their way to the Dahara City Sand Travel Inn. The innkeeper, in gratitude for what had been done for the city, waived the room fees without being asked. Ash and the others thanked him sincerely. That evening, on the inn's ground floor, Ash used the video call terminal to contact Professor Oak in Kanto. He told him everything, from the beginning. Professor Oak's face went through several rapid expressions. What? An ancient trainer riding Kyurem defeated 6 legendary Pokémon? Yes. That shouldn't be possible. Professor Oak muttered to himself, working through it. Dialga governed time. Palkia governed space. Those two alone would be considered beyond virtually any other Pokémon. Add Giratina, Groudon, and Kyogre to that equation, plus Hoopa unbound at full power, and the numbers simply did not work. Kyurem's power couldn't extend that far. Ash thought for a moment. Professor Oak, this Kyurem was different from the one I encountered in Unova. That Kyurem was blue and could become white Kyurem or black Kyurem. But Mr. Lucian's Kyurem seemed to have all 3 forms combined at once. Professor Oak went very still. Something surfaced in his memory, a legend from the Unova region that he had read in old texts years ago and filed away as mythology. In ancient times, according to those records, a being called the Dragon of Truth had descended upon the land of Unova in the form of a dragon stone. When conflict arose between 2 princes with different ideals, the kingdom fractured, and the dragon stone fractured with it. The physical truth became Kyurem. The truth of ideals became Zekrom. The truth of principles became Reshiram. 3 Pokémon from one original being, separated by the divergence of what humanity valued. But if that being had never divided? Ash, Professor Oak said, with more urgency than usual, where is this Mr. Lucian right now? I need to speak with him. Ash blinked. He's resting in his room. Dahara City. You're in Dahara City right now? That's right. Stay there. I'm coming. On the 2nd floor of the inn, Lucian was doing something he had not been able to do in a very long time. He was looking at modern technology. The room had a television, a phone, a computer, an air conditioning unit, and a refrigerator, and he had been working his way through all of them with the thoughtful attention of an engineer examining something he already understood in principle but had never seen implemented. Dragonite, Volcarona, and Superior stood nearby, watching him with matching expressions of curious attentiveness. Dragonite made an inquiring sound. "This is a refrigerator," Lucian said. "If you put food inside, it stays cold and doesn't spoil." Dragonite's eyes went wide. It looked at the refrigerator. Then it looked at Kyurem. Then back at the refrigerator. Lucian noticed the comparison being made and felt a moment of mild awkwardness. It was true that in Lucian City Castle, he had developed a habit of asking Kyurem to chill watermelon, black tea, and snacks when the weather was warm. A legendary dragon-type ice Pokémon, effectively being used as a cooling device for afternoon refreshments. "A refrigerator is more convenient," Lucian said, to no one in particular. "And it means every household in Unova could have one without needing to involve Kyurem." Dragonite's face lit up with the expression of something that had just understood a genuinely useful thing. Lucian looked around the room at the other appliances. His mind moved to practical questions. Could he bring anything back? Some of the more complex technology would require considerable resources to reproduce, but the underlying principles were things he could work with. A computer in particular would be useful. When he eventually had downtime in the castle, being able to access novels and films would be considerably better than staring at the ceiling. He could already picture Dragonite watching something on a screen and being utterly transfixed by it. There was one practical obstacle, however. He had no money. Chapter 256, Hoopa. It was not that he wanted luxury. He simply thought that if certain technologies could be brought back to his own world, the people of Unova could live with considerably less hardship, better food preservation, better communication, better tools for everyday life. The absence of money was a genuinely frustrating obstacle. He was not going to take anything by force that violated his principles, and in a peaceful world like this one, it was simply not something that needed to happen. He was still working through the problem when a soft knock came at the door. "Mr. Lucian? Are you still awake? We wanted to talk with you about Hoopa." Lucian set his thoughts aside and opened the door. Ash, Serena, Clement, and Bonnie were gathered in the hallway, and the small Hoopa hovered above Ash's head. The moment it saw Lucian, it waved both small hands enthusiastically. "Lucian! Lucian!" "Come in," Lucian said, stepping back to make room. As they filed into the room, they encountered Dragonite, Volcarona, and Superior, who were still examining the room's appliances with great interest. "These are your Pokémon?" Ash asked, eyes moving between them. "They are. They look incredibly strong," Bonnie said, her eyes bright. "They're beautifully trained," Serena agreed. Clement had already noticed the Pokémon's expressions and was looking around the room with quiet understanding. "Mr. Lucian, are you all very interested in these modern devices?" Lucian saw no reason to be evasive about it. "They're genuinely impressive. If I could bring some back to my own world, they would improve people's lives considerably." He paused. "Unfortunately, I arrived here without any of this world's currency. So buying anything isn't currently an option." The group stared at him. The most powerful trainer any of them had ever encountered, the person who had stood on Kyurem's back above Dahara City and single-handedly ended a crisis involving 6 legendary Pokémon, was broke. It was, when they thought about it, completely logical. He was from another world. Of course he had no money. Ash scratched the back of his head. "Well, that's easy enough. I've got travel money. Not a huge amount, but you can borrow it." "I can help too," Serena added. The small Hoopa thought about this for a moment with a very serious expression. Then it opened one of its rings. A shower of gold coins came through and piled up on the floor. Lucian looked at the pile of gold. He looked at Hoopa. "Thank you," he said, after a moment, and meant it. He looked around at all of them. The goodwill was entirely genuine, and it moved him more than he expected.
Thank you, everyone. But the most important thing right now isn't the appliances. It's helping Hoopa understand what it needs to understand.
They gathered around the sofa and talked through it, what Hoopa needed, how to approach the sealed power in the prison bottle, how to help the two sides of Hoopa's nature find each other without the resentment taking over. Ash set his jaw with the familiar, complete resolve.
I'll do everything I can to help. Hoopa will try too. The small Hoopa pressed its hands together, its expression more earnest than anyone had seen it.
It was not going to let them down.
The following morning, they began in earnest.
The method they attempted first was direct, using combined effort to help Hoopa reach through the ring and draw its sealed power back. But every time Hoopa made contact with the prison bottle, the resentment that had built up inside it over 100 years pushed back like a wall, and Hoopa flinched away, feeling as though it were about to be swallowed by something vast and dark. The attempts continued to fail, and eventually the group turned toward Lucien.
Mr. Lucien, what should we do? Murray asked.
Lucien was quiet for a moment.
Then he looked at Hoopa. Hoopa. That force inside the bottle isn't trying to consume you. Even if you merge with it, you won't disappear. You're the same being. Hoopa listened. The important thing is to try to understand it. Because it has been alone in that small bottle for 100 years. It hasn't seen sunlight. It hasn't seen the moon. It hasn't had a single donut. He paused. Anyone kept like that would feel resentment. It's not wrong. It must feel very wronged. So, Hoopa, try to understand it. Try to reach it rather than resist it. Hoopa went quiet. It looked at the prison bottle in front of it, the liveliness that was usually so constant in its face going still. Something moved in its eyes that had not been there before. It flew slowly to the prison bottle and hovered in front of it. Its small hand reached out and pressed gently against the glass surface. The glass was cool and smooth. Inside, the sealed power pressed back faintly. Hoopa held still. Its mind turned over what Lucien had said. 100 years in darkness. No sunlight. No donuts. No one to talk to. No one who knew you were there. Its nose ached. The fear had been there a moment ago. Now, quietly, it was something else.
I'm sorry, Hoopa said, in a small, soft voice. It bowed its head slightly toward the bottle. For leaving you alone for so long.
That was Hoopa's fault. Hoopa wasn't thinking. The restless energy inside the prison bottle went still. For one breath. 2.
Then, slowly, a faint aura began to move outward from within the bottle, tentative and thin, carrying within it 100 years of loneliness and resistance and the exhausted grief of something that had been waiting a very long time to be acknowledged. The markings of the imprisonment seal receded slowly from the prison bottle. The power that had been contained within it for 100 years transformed into a quiet light and flowed outward, moving toward the small Hoopa. There was no violence in it, no arrogance. Only the gradual, careful movement of something that had been waiting to come home. Hoopa did not flinch. It spread its arms wide and accepted it. The light wrapped around it completely. Its body grew, 6 strong arms emerging, each ringed with gold. The aura around it deepened and steadied, something settling into place that had not been settled before. When Hoopa opened its eyes, the playful recklessness that had characterized every moment since Lucien first met it was still there, but underneath it now was something grounded and certain. The true Hoopa returns, it said, and its voice had changed, rougher, older, carrying the weight of both halves of itself at once. Yes. Bonnie's voice came out as barely a whisper before she caught herself, her face bright with joy. Serena had both hands pressed to her mouth, her eyes full of warmth. Ash's fists were clenched, his expression doing several things at once before resolving into a wide, fierce grin. Hoopa, you're incredible. Murray and Baraz stood together, both of them smiling, both of them with eyes that were too bright. A century of their family's hope, the wish their ancestor had carried into the prison bottle and passed down through generations, had finally found its completion. The light faded. Hoopa returned to its small form and floated in the air, looking down at its hands, then up at the people surrounding it. It spun once in a small, happy circle. Hoopa did it. Hoopa can get along with itself and use its power properly. It raised one hand, and a golden ring opened slowly in the air. Through it, another part of space was clearly, stably visible, no chaos, no dangerous flickering, just a clean and steady connection between 2 points. Lucian looked at it and felt the weight he had been carrying lift somewhat. Congratulations, Hoopa. You understand now what your power is actually for. This also meant that when the time came, Hoopa could open a dimensional portal and send him home. That piece of the problem was solved. Everyone's faces were bright, and then hurried footsteps came from downstairs, and the innkeeper's voice called up, "Ash. There's a guest from Kanto. Says it's urgent." Ash's eyes lit up immediately. He looked at Lucian. "That has to be Professor Oak. He heard about you and came all the way here." Lucian was mildly surprised. He followed Ash and the others downstairs. Professor Samuel Oak was exactly as Lucian had always pictured him from what he knew. A scholar whose enthusiasm for Pokémon research had never dimmed, whose reputation in the Pokémon world was essentially unequaled. The moment the professor's eyes found Lucian, something in his expression shifted into focused, almost reverent attention. He was looking at Lucian the way a researcher looks at something he has spent a long time wondering about and has suddenly found real. He bowed slightly, with genuine sincerity. "Mr. Lucian, I am Professor Oak, from Pallet Town in Kanto. I apologize for coming without warning, but there is something I very much need to verify with you." Pikachu, on Ash's shoulder, looked between the two men with mild confusion. "Hello, Professor Oak," Lucian said warmly. "What is it you want to know?" "Not here," Professor Oak said. "Please, come with me." He led the group to a quiet cafe nearby, and once they were seated, Lucian brought out Kyurem. Professor Oak looked up at it and went entirely still for a moment, the recognition and wonder on his face unguarded. "Yes," he said softly. "Yes, that's it." He turned back to Lucian and began asking questions, working through the legend he had recalled the night before, the original Dragonstone, the split between the princes, the 3 Pokémon that had emerged from one original being. The legend had always described it as something that had simply happened, without explaining why or how or whether anything might have changed it. The conversation moved quickly. Lucian answered directly, without concealing much. Professor Oak listened with the quality of attention of someone who has spent their entire life preparing to understand exactly this kind of thing. After a while, Professor Oak leaned back with the particular expression of a man whose understanding of the world has just expanded significantly and who finds this deeply satisfying. "So you were caught in a dimensional anomaly and ended up here by accident. And now that Hoopa has mastered its power, you're planning to return?" "Yes," Lucian said. His gaze moved to Hoopa, then back. "Soon." The brightness on Ash's face changed. Serena went quiet. Even Bonnie's expression dimmed at the edges. Ash's hand closed into a fist. "You want to leave already?" "We haven't even had a chance to properly thank you," Serena said softly. "For Dahara City." Lucian looked at them, and felt something warm and genuine move through him. In this world that had nothing to do with his own, among people he had known for less than 2 days, something uncomplicated and real had formed. No politics, no history, no weight of obligation. Just the straightforward goodwill of people who had simply been themselves. He reached over and gently rested a hand on Bonnie's head. "Every gathering ends eventually. My kingdom is waiting. My companions and my people are waiting." He looked at all of them. "But I will carry this time with me. Thank you for everything." Hoopa flew to his side and looked up at him, its wide eyes full of feeling. "Hoopa will miss you." "I'll miss Hoopa too," Lucian said, and meant it completely. He patted Hoopa's head, and then remembered the reason he had come looking for it in the first place. "Hoopa, there's one more thing I need your help with." "Anything. As long as Hoopa can do it,"
Hoopa will do it with everything it has.
The reason I came to this part of the world, Lucian said, was to ask Hoopa, in my own time, for help finding a Pokemon called Melmetal. We're facing a serious crisis, and Melmetal's cooperation is essential to resolving it.
Professor Oak leaned forward. So you found Hoopa in your own era, but that Hoopa sent you into a different dimension, and you ended up here by accident?
That's right, Lucian said.
He paused. That Hoopa was considerably less cooperative than this one. Hoopa looked slightly embarrassed.
It was self-aware enough to know exactly what it had been like thousands of years ago. If past Hoopa had encountered Lucian and Kyurem, it would absolutely have attacked them first and not felt any particular regret about it afterward.
Chapter 257, Eternal Life. Hoopa's face went slightly pink. It scratched its head and laughed. That Hoopa isn't the same as this Hoopa. This Hoopa will only help Lucian. No more causing trouble. Professor Oak's expression had shifted into thoughtful consideration. Melmetal.
A steel type that evolved from a Meltan colony, possessing the ability to produce and shape metal. In historical accounts, it was considered a significant force for addressing large-scale crises.
Reinforcing defenses, rebuilding infrastructure, that kind of application.
Lucian looked at him with mild surprise.
Have you met one, Professor?
No, actually. Professor Oak scratched the back of his head with a slightly embarrassed expression. Everything I know about it came from contacts in the Alola region.
Lucian absorbed that. No need to make this complicated.
Hoopa announced, with the confidence of someone who had just realized it could solve the problem immediately. It stretched out one small hand and opened a golden ring.
Hoopa, seek. The ring expanded. A stream of silver light poured through it.
And then Melmetal was there. It landed on the ground with a weight that the floor acknowledged. Its body was composed entirely of a liquid silver metallic substance that moved and settled with the quality of something between solid and flowing, dark gray nuts embedded in its neck, chest, and limbs, a single small golden nut sitting atop its head, and one dark gray orb rotating slowly at its center, its eye. Its arms were long and enormously heavy, ending in iron fists that simply sitting still on the ground seemed to require the Earth's cooperation. The metallic sheen around it was cold and absolute. Even breathing near it felt like the air had developed opinions. Ash and the others looked up at it and went quiet. Melmetal looked around at its new surroundings with the expression of something that had absolutely no idea what had just happened and was taking stock before deciding what to do about it. A low, resonant metallic sound came from somewhere in its chest, vibrating the air slightly.
Hoopa called you. Hoopa informed it helpfully. Lucian needs your help. Lucian stepped forward immediately. I'm extremely sorry for the abrupt arrival. I didn't intend to bring you here by force.
He kept his voice calm and direct. I came because my world is facing a serious crisis, and your strength is essential to resolving it.
In exchange, I'll do whatever I can to fulfill whatever you need. And if you're unwilling, I'll have Hoopa send you back right now. No pressure. Melmetal's single dark orb moved slowly to Lucian. Held there. Then moved to Kyurem.
The metal composing Melmetal's body shifted subtly, something between wariness and recognition.
Kyurem looked back at it without expression.
Then, through telepathy, Kyurem sent something directly into Melmetal's awareness.
Not words. Images.
Burning landscapes, the suffering of countless Pokemon and people, the shape of a crisis that was already building and would arrive whether or not anyone was ready for it.
Melmetal went still.
The silence in the cafe stretched. Then, slowly, Melmetal's liquid metal body undulated. The keynut at the top of its head shifted with a faint, quiet sound. One enormous iron fist rose, not threatening, not striking, just moving, and pointed at Lucian. A low, resonant sound came from it. Ash's face immediately broke into relief. It agreed. Lucian was genuinely surprised by how quickly and simply that had resolved. He had prepared for considerably more negotiation.
Hoopa circled Melmetal in delighted loops. Lucian can go back and save his kingdom.
The room's mood lifted at once. Hoopa retracted its seeking ring and steadied itself, prepared to open a proper dimensional portal.
Melmetal had joined the group. The last piece was in place. Lucian did not linger. He said his goodbyes to Professor Oak, to Murray and Baraz, the latter two gladly handing over the prison bottle containing the sealed imprison power at his request. They had no further need of it now that Hoopa had become whole, and if Lucian said it was useful, they were inclined to trust him. He put it away carefully. He turned to Hoopa. Thank you. For everything. Hoopa is ready.
It nodded vigorously, then raised its hands. The golden ring blazed with light, expanding until it was vast, tearing through the space in front of them with a sound like the world deciding to move aside. A stable portal opened, wide and steady, the dimensional boundary clear and smooth rather than chaotic and dangerous as it had been before.
Through it, the faint outline of a distant spacetime was visible.
Lucian turned to say goodbye to the group, and immediately noticed that Ash was not where he had been.
Where's Ash? Mr. Lucian.
Ash came running from down the street, slightly out of breath, carrying something flat and rectangular under one arm. He held it out when he reached Lucian.
A tablet. I went and bought it with my travel money.
It has a lot of Pokémon data on it.
I thought it might be useful to you.
Lucian looked at it, then at Ash, and felt the warmth of it settle in his chest.
Thank you, Ash.
Truly. He thought for a moment, then reached into his coat and produced a Pokeball. It was old-fashioned in design, handmade, the craftsmanship of a skilled artisan in his kingdom.
I traveled quickly and didn't bring gifts. This is a Pokeball from my world. It isn't worth much, but it's something to remember this by.
Ash took it in both hands and held it with the same seriousness he gave everything that mattered to him.
I'll keep it always.
Nearby, Professor Oak was looking at the Pokeball with an expression Lucian did not fully notice, the controlled excitement of a researcher who has just encountered something that does not fit his existing framework and is very much looking forward to understanding why. Because by his knowledge, Pokeballs had been invented roughly 300 years ago, in the Hisui region, in the era of the researcher Laventon.
And if Lucian's world predated that by thousands of years, then what exactly was in Ash's hands right now? Lucian did not notice Professor Oak's expression.
His own thoughts had gone somewhere else. He was looking at Ash and the others, and thinking that on the day this boy was born, Lucian himself had probably already been gone for centuries. He had spent years pursuing something close to immortality, and had not yet found it.
The gap between his era and theirs was not something sentiment could bridge.
He took a slow breath and faced all of them.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you for everything. Goodbye, Mr. Lucian. Hoopa will miss you.
The small Hoopa waved both arms at full extension. Lucian smiled at them all, turned, and stepped through the portal.
Hoopa was reclining on its golden throne, accepting the worship of the townspeople with its characteristic air of someone who has fully earned this and expects it to continue indefinitely. Then the space in front of it shifted. A familiar ring opened. A familiar figure stepped through. Hoopa's eyes went wide. You? How did you get back? That's impossible. Its face was a portrait of genuine shock. It had sent these two into another dimension. Without Hoopa's own intervention, return should have been completely out of the question. What had happened? Lucian's mouth curved slightly. I should actually thank you for that. The unease that crossed Hoopa's face was immediate. It reached for its rings, ready to send them away again, and then it saw what Lucian was holding, a flask, old and unusual, its lid open. A powerful suction force emanated from within it, and Hoopa felt something it had not felt in a very long time. Its power leaving it. Panic crossed its face. It tried to move, tried to summon a ring, tried to do anything, and found that Kyurem had frozen it in place without making any particular effort about it. No! Hoopa's enormous unbound form shrank rapidly, visibly, until a small Hoopa confined was standing in front of them, staring at its own hands in complete disbelief. You hateful human! What did you do to me? Much cuter, Lucien said, with genuine amusement. He looked at Hoopa evenly. Come with me, Hoopa. Absolutely not. Hoopa summoned a ring immediately and launched an attack. Lucien did not move. He simply watched Hoopa. Kirim didn't even need a full moment. Hoopa was frozen mid-attack before it finished the motion. Lucien took out a pokeball and caught it. The ball shook vigorously for a considerable time before settling. The townspeople stared. What did you do to Lord Hoopa? One of them demanded. Lucien looked at the crowd. Hoopa is not a gentle Pokémon. With its temperament, it would have destroyed this place eventually. Take the wealth it left you and build something real with it. He mounted Kirim and departed before anyone found the words to respond. He had been heading back toward Galar when Kirim's voice reached him. Zygarde is waiting below. Lucien looked down. He spotted the familiar black and green canine form almost immediately. Let's see what it needs. He landed. Zygarde looked at him for a moment. There is a Pokémon that wants to meet you. The forest in the heart of Kalos was different from every other forest Lucien had walked through. The air was cleaner here, the life force almost tangible, moving through the space between the trees like water in a very slow current. The further they went, the more present it became, until breathing felt like drinking something. Birds called in the canopy. Vines wrapped ancient trunks. Wildflowers grew where they chose, untouched and unmanaged, radiating a kind of vitality that had nothing to do with cultivation. The forest opened. An endless field of flowers stretched before them, pink and blue and gold, moving gently in a breeze that seemed to exist only here. Warm light came through the canopy in scattered points and rested on the petals. In the center of the field stood a figure. Lucien went still. Xerneas. Its coat of black and gold, its 8 branching antlers catching the filtered light, its head bowed to the flowers. As though it heard or sensed the arrival of the group, it raised its head slowly. Its gaze found Lucien, direct and unhurried, holding within it a quality of presence that was different from simply being very powerful. Something older and quieter than that. You've come, human. Lucien looked at Zygarde, then back at Xerneas, his expression genuinely uncertain. Xerneas. What did you want to speak with me about? Your name is Lucien? Yes. I heard of your actions from Zygarde. Xerneas's voice was very soft, carrying that particular quality of things that have existed long enough to find no reason to be loud. A human who cares deeply about Pokémon. Who built a kingdom, alone, where people and Pokémon live together as one. Where war does not fall on Pokémon as victims, and humans and Pokémon depend on each other and live well. It paused. And I have seen the changes beginning to move through this land. I believe that is also because of you. Lucien said nothing for a moment. Lucien, Xerneas said. Why do you do all of this? Lucien considered the question honestly. To build a world where people and Pokémon can live together well. Something beautiful, or at least something better than what exists. Such an enormous undertaking. It must take a very long time. As long as I can do it without a guilty conscience, that's enough. Xerneas repeated the words quietly to itself. Without a guilty conscience. It looked at him for a long moment. Is that your philosophy, Lucien? Lucien frowned slightly, not entirely sure where this was going. Xerneas and Zygarde exchanged something between them, wordless. Then Xerneas turned back to Lucien and took a slow step forward. Then another. The 8 antlers on its head began to glow, the light building from each branch, 7 colors layering over each other, brightening with each step until the whole field was suffused with it. Lucien. I agree with what you are building, and the spirit in which you build it. Today, I will give you what you have been looking for. The light reached Lucien before the words had fully settled. It was not like anything he expected. There was no pain, no dramatic transformation. It was simply warmth, moving through him like the first warmth after a long cold, spreading from his chest outward until it had touched everything.
A silver, living light, ancient and impossibly gentle. The weariness he had been carrying, the accumulated strain of years of work and the lingering disruption from the dimensional crossing, all of it was quietly, thoroughly dissolved. When it faded, Lucian stood in the flower field and understood, in his body rather than just his mind, that something had changed permanently. He would not age. He would not weaken with time or fail to illness. He would remain, as long as nothing capable of destroying him entirely chose to do so. This was eternal life. The realization moved through him slowly, and with it came a quiet storm of feeling that he did not entirely know what to do with. Why had Xerneas done this? Without condition, without negotiation, simply looked at him and given him what he had been reaching toward for years? Xerneas's voice, when it came, was gentle but carried within it something that was not soft. I give you this not so that you can be free of time, but so that you have enough time to walk the path you have chosen. Protect the kingdom you have built. Protect the bond between humanity and Pokémon. Let the peace you carry in your heart have the time it needs to truly last. Lucian was quiet for a long moment. He breathed in the flower-scented air, and the feeling in his chest settled into something he recognized as gratitude, deep and real. He bowed. Thank you. I understand. Xerneas gave a small nod. The seven-colored light on its antlers faded gently, petal by petal. I see your heart clearly, Lucian. Go now. Your world needs you more than this place does. Chapter 258. Lucian sat with the warmth of Xerneas's gift still present in his body, a quiet and steady power moving beneath his skin like deep water. He looked down at his hands. The feeling was not dramatic. It was simply a settled certainty. His flesh would not decay with time, his vitality would not diminish and drain away the way it did for every human being. He was rooted now, like an ancient tree that had found the depth of the earth it needed. Eternal life, he said softly. Kyurem landed beside him, its ice-blue eyes without particular expression but with something in them that was not quite neutrality. Something closer to acknowledgement. Zygarde stood at a distance and watched, still as a marker post, quietly witnessing. Then Xerneas turned. Its elegant body was already beginning to change, the living warmth that surrounded it intensifying until the whole flower field blazed with it. Lucian straightened. Xerneas? Within the light, Xerneas's form shifted. The deer shape dissolved, branches and roots emerging, growing upward and outward, until what stood in the center of the flower field was no longer an animal but a tree. Ancient, vast, and utterly still. The voice came on the wind, already fading. Lucian. I am a little tired. I will sleep for a while. When I wake, I will come and see the world you have built. Then the tree of life was silent. Xerneas, having given away what it had given, settled into its long sleep. By the time it woke again, it would probably be thousands of years from now. Lucian stood in the flower field and looked at the great tree for a long moment. I know, he said quietly. The life force in the forest began to calm around him. The flowers continued to sway. The clear fragrance stayed in the air. He turned to Zygarde. Thank you. Zygarde gave a small nod. Then it turned and left without ceremony, returning to the work of monitoring the entire ecosystem of Kalos. Lucian watched it disappear into the trees. Let's go back, he said to Kyurem. He mounted, the cold winds settling around his robes. The prison bottle was secure against his chest. Somewhere inside its pokeball, Hoopa was still making its displeasure known in various small ways. Kyurem spread its wings and lifted them into the open sky. The Kalos land shrank beneath them, and the ocean opened ahead, vast in gray-blue, and across it, the coast of Galar appeared through the mist. Before long, slumbering town came into view. It was larger than when he had left. The construction had continued, the streets fuller, the walls extended, the fields outside the city pushing further into the surrounding land. Humans and Pokémon moved through it in the easy, habitual way of people who have been doing this long enough that it no longer requires thought. The moment Kyurem descended toward the city lord's mansion, Zacian, Zamazenta, and Calyrex emerged from their respective quarters, recognizing the presence before it had fully landed. Chelsea had spotted Kurum's silhouette from across the city and was already leading people forward to meet him.
Lucian stepped down and gave the assembled group a small nod. "What has the Gaylor royal family been doing while I was away?"
Chelsea reported efficiently. "Your Majesty, our scouts have confirmed that troops from various parts of Gaylor are consolidating at the fortresses nearest to slumbering town."
Patty 4 is getting restless, then. Lucian considered this without urgency. "Should we request reinforcements from Unova?" "We considered it, Your Majesty." He shook his head. Geralt and the Legion were occupied with the Kanto region's Pokémon League establishment, and the Pokémon League trainers stationed in Unova were sufficient for domestic stability. Here in Gaylor, what they had was enough.
A royal family rattling its swords at the border did not require a significant response.
"Leave it for now," Lucian said. "The most pressing matter is Zacian and Zamazenta's weapons.
We need to be ready before the darkest day arrives." He turned to face the questioning eyes of several Pokémon and reached for 2 Pokeballs.
Melmetal and Hoopa materialized side by side. Melmetal absorbed the unfamiliar surroundings with its customary heavy stillness.
Hoopa, on the other hand, emerged at full volume.
"Let go of me, you terrible human."
Calyrex, Zacian, Zamazenta, and Chelsea all turned to look at it with varying degrees of surprise.
"Your Majesty, what is?"
"Hoopa," Lucian said simply.
While Hoopa was still mid-sentence, Lucian produced a donut and placed it directly into the open mouth. The sentence stopped. Hoopa stood very still. Its eyes went wide.
The hands that had been raised in indignation froze in mid-air.
It chewed once, slowly.
The fluffy sweetness, the milk and malt, the warmth of it, spread across its tongue and erased everything else completely.
"Mum." A pause. "Mum."
It chewed again, eyes now fully round, all previous fury suspended in place like something that had been set down and would need to be picked back up later, but not right now. Calyrex cleared its throat with the expression of someone who has witnessed something they were not entirely prepared for.
Zacian and Zamazenta looked at each other.
Something passed between them and the silence that neither of them had a word for. Chelsea's mouth moved slightly.
"His Majesty's methods of establishing rapport with Pokémon are," she murmured to herself, "unique." Lucian watched Hoopa consume the donut with complete, blissful absorption and allowed himself a quiet, dry amusement. Behave yourself and you get to eat. Cause trouble, and it's back into the Pokeball. He withdrew his hand. "That's the arrangement." Hoopa made several sounds around the remains of the donut that could have meant anything. It did not particularly want to go back into the Pokeball. The situation was obvious to Hoopa even without anyone spelling it out.
Too many powerful Pokémon around it, no realistic path to escape, and most of its strength drained away and sealed inside a bottle.
There was nothing to be done about any of it.
So Hoopa sat in the corner of the courtyard, hugging what remained of its donut and gnawing at it with the particular wounded dignity of a creature whose territory has been taken and who cannot fight back, expressing its dissatisfaction the only way currently available to it. Lucian left it to this and turned to Melmetal. The steel type stood in the courtyard like a pillar of cold iron, its liquid metal body emitting a steady silver light, the key nuts at its joints rotating slowly. Even at rest, the weight of the power within it was palpable, something that pressed against the air around it without effort.
"This is Melmetal," Lucian said to the assembled group.
"It controls metal and shapes it through its inherent power.
For the time ahead, it will be staying here to forge weapons for you too." Zacian and Zamazenta bowed their heads slightly in acknowledgement.
They could feel it clearly, the depth of Melmetal's strength, something that went beyond ordinary combat capacity entirely.
Calyrex's eyes moved with quiet understanding. "You mean?" "Yes," Lucian said. "The darkest day is coming. Ordinary weapons won't be sufficient against what Eternatus will unleash." He looked at Zacian and Zamazenta.
"I intend to use Melmetal's metal, human craftsmanship, and Calyrex's king's power to forge weapons made specifically for you.
Power sufficient to face Eternatus and the night it brings." A sharp gleam moved through Zacian's golden eyes. Beside it, Zamazenta's aura deepened, something like anticipation and readiness moving through it in a wave.
Melmetal seemed to understand the words forging and weapons and what was being asked of it.
It raised one enormous iron fist slowly, and then brought it down. A low, resonant clang moved through the courtyard, felt as much as heard.
Liquid metal flowed around its body, beginning to glow, a power awakening within it that had nothing to do with combat and everything to do with creation.
Chelsea bowed. "I'll have the city's blacksmiths prepare immediately." Lucian gave a small nod, then looked at Melmetal. "I'll ask you to work hard in the days ahead."
Melmetal's dark orb turned toward him. It gave one small, unhurried nod. Chelsea departed.
The courtyard held its collective breath.
Lucian looked around at what he had assembled: Zacian, Zamazenta, Calyrex, Kyurem, Melmetal.
And in the corner, still working through its donut with an air of studious concentration, Hoopa. Even unwilling, Hoopa was firmly under control. Against this formation, even Eternatus would be facing something substantial. He turned toward the corner. "Hoopa." Hoopa's ears moved.
Its head came up slowly, mouth still sticky with sugar.
"What?" "I'm not finished eating yet."
"When everything is over, I'll prepare a mountain of donuts for you," Lucian said. "But until then, behave yourself, don't cause trouble, and don't attempt to use your rings to escape. If you cooperate, I will return your full power to you."
Hoopa's eyes went wide. The affected sulkiness dropped immediately. "A mountain?" "Yes." "Then, fine. I'll listen to you. Just this once."
It puffed out its small chest with the energy of something that has decided to commit fully to a position.
"But you are absolutely not allowed to change your mind. If you do, Hoopa will eat all your donuts." Lucian laughed quietly and said nothing more.
The prison bottle was secure against his chest, Hoopa's power was continuously restricted within it, and Kyurem was keeping a steady and completely calm eye on the situation.
Hoopa was not going anywhere.
Chelsea returned shortly with the city's best blacksmiths moving quickly behind her. They came around the corner into the courtyard, took in the gathering of legendary Pokémon standing in it like a forest of divine presence, and went collectively still with their legs threatening to give way. They bowed deeply, not daring to breathe too loudly.
"Your Majesty. Everything is ready. Take us to the forge."
The group moved to the large, newly built forging ground behind the city lord's mansion. The furnaces were prepared and waiting, the floor laid with hard stone, supporting pillars standing on all sides. Lucian stood in the center and looked at Melmetal.
"We can begin." Melmetal stepped forward without ceremony and moved to the furnace.
It raised one enormous fist, and the metal composing its arm began to move, the silvery blue light within it building rapidly.
This was not the heat of ordinary flames.
It was the forging power that arose from the very essence of metal itself, pure and absolute, something that had no equivalent in ordinary craftsmanship. The sound that followed shook the walls. From Melmetal's palm, drops of extraordinarily pure liquid metal fell, one by one, each one carrying within it an elasticity and strength that no ordinary mineral could approach.
The metal hit the ground and held its shape, beginning to form. The blacksmiths moved immediately, their fires lit, their tools in their hands. Zacian and Zamazenta stepped forward together.
Each of them poured their own power into the forming metal, the will of the golden sword, the will of the silver shield, one sharp and decisive, one dense and immovable, both wrapping around what Melmetal had given.
Calyrex closed its eyes.
The king's power flowed outward from it in a light that was both gentle and absolute, filling the entire forging ground, settling into the metal along with everything else. In their name, I entrust to this steel the responsibility of protection and the power to decide.
The flames moved. The divine metal took its first shapes.
Lucian stood among the humans and Pokémon working together and felt something that was not quite pride and not quite peace but held elements of both. Inside the furnace, it was not only metal and power that were merging. It was belief. It was the bond between different kinds of beings who had chosen to stand together.
Whatever emerged from this forge would carry that within it permanently. These would not simply be Zacian's sword and Zamazenta's shield.
They would be weapons bearing the combined will of humanity and Pokémon, built to cut through darkness and hold the earth intact.
Not far away, Hoopa floated with half a donut in its hands, watching the whole thing with an expression it could not quite account for.
It had seen humans competing for power and treasure countless times. It had seen greed and manipulation and the ugly things people did when they thought they could get away with them.
It had never seen anything like this.
Strange humans, it muttered softly, and took another bite. It had to admit, not actually the worst situation it had ever been in. The light in the forging ground grew brighter as the hours passed. The clashing powers of sword and shield wove together in patterns that made the air itself feel like it was being remade. Melmetal emitted a low, deep sound of satisfaction. The temperature continued to rise. Then, after a long while, the light in the furnace reached its peak. Two streams of radiance broke through the heat in a single moment, one to each side, hanging suspended in the air above the forge with a brilliance that made every person present shade their eyes. A sword, entirely golden, its blade alive with a sharpness that felt less like metal and more like the concept of cutting itself, resonating perfectly with Zacian's aura. A shield, heavy and gold-edged, its surface radiating an unyielding force, perfectly matched to Zamazenta's will, the aura around it saying unmistakably that this was a thing that did not break. Above both, a quality of presence that could only be called royal, Calyrex's king's power, settled into the weapons like a crown into the forehead it was made for. The sword and shield cried out together, a sound that reverberated outward from the forging ground, past the city walls, across the fields, until the people and Pokémon of Slumbering Town stopped what they were doing and turned toward the city lord's mansion without knowing why.
Zacian stepped forward. Its head lowered.
Its teeth closed gently around the hilt of the sacred sword. The moment the divine weapon connected with it, golden light engulfed Zacian completely. Its fur blazed with brilliance, golden lines spreading across its body, converging into a crown of light across its head. The aura that had always been powerful but contained erupted outward without restriction, climbing straight into the sky. Fairy and steel combined, the pressure of the sword's power reaching every corner of the courtyard.
Hero of many battles, Zacian, became Zacian the crown sword.
The sacred sword trembled in its mouth. Every ounce of its power had found its home.
Almost in the same breath, Zamazenta stepped forward.
The shield's golden light flowed into its body and spread outward, forming before it the great protective face of what it was meant to be. The crimson lines across its fur deepened. Its aura settled like a mountain settling into the earth, immovable, absolute, the shield will fully and finally awake.
Hero of many battles, Zamazenta, became Zamazenta the crown shield. Chapter 259, The King's Decision. Crown sword and crown shield. Born just like that.
The craftsmen present stood with wide eyes and open mouths. The aura radiating from the two Pokémon was something none of them had felt before, the specific, unmistakable weight of a king's presence.
Zacian and Zamazenta turned toward Lucian. Zacian spoke. "Thank you." Zamazenta said nothing, but its eyes carried everything the words would have. They were legendary Pokémon.
They would not refuse the chance to become stronger. And in their understanding, everything they had just become was because of Lucian, the journey across time and space to find Melmetal, the invitation to Calyrex, the human craftsmen brought together, all of it coordinated for their sake.
They would not forget that. Calyrex's expression showed the particular exhaustion of something that has given a great deal of itself. The king's power channeled into the weapons had taken a toll. "Everyone rest," Lucian said.
Zacian and Zamazenta, now carrying their new power, remained in Slumbering Town to wait for the darkest day.
Hoopa and Melmetal stayed as well, though under different circumstances. Hoopa's power was sealed and it could not defeat Lucian, so it had little choice.
Lucian, for his part, did not restrain it beyond what was necessary and had a room stocked with donuts prepared for it.
Melmetal, curious about what weapons forged from its own metal could accomplish, chose to stay. Calyrex stayed too.
Through the days of working together, it had formed a genuine impression of Lucian, the red tea prepared to its taste, the spread of its name throughout the city, the respect extended to it without performance. But Calyrex could sense that the atmosphere in Galar had been growing unusual.
The humans seemed to be moving toward another war. It found Lucian and asked directly, "My friend, what are you planning to do?" Zacian, Zamazenta, and Hoopa all looked over. Lucian looked at Calyrex with focused attention and answered a question with a question. "Calyrex, what do you think of the humans who rule this land?" Calyrex considered.
During its travels across Galar, it had seen ordinary people living in hardship while the royal families and nobility comfortably used the lower classes as instruments. It had seen Pokémon treated as property.
In contrast, the city under Lucian's management was something else.
Humans and Pokémon supporting each other, building a life together, no one harming the other.
Given a choice between the two, Calyrex would choose the latter without hesitation.
"You have built something I have not," it said. Lucian was briefly surprised by that. But it was not quite what he was asking about.
"What if I asked you to become the ruler of this land?" Calyrex went still.
"I am not from Galar," Lucian continued.
"Kiram and I come from a distant region called Unova. That is my country.
I came here because I want to build a world where humans and Pokémon can live together.
Once everything here is in place, I will return to Unova."
"I am afraid that is not possible," Calyrex said, a slight frown in its expression.
"Human affairs are considerably more complicated than Pokémon affairs.
If you leave and I am managing this land alone, it will descend into chaos."
Lucian let a small smile show. "What if I send people from Unova to help you?"
"You rule in name, as the true king of Galar. I establish an organization called the Pokémon League.
The League handles all matters, large and small, on this land, and guides the integration of humans and Pokémon." Calyrex processed this. If that were the arrangement, every person in Galar would come to know the King of Abundance by name and by reputation.
The power of faith that grew from that knowledge was not a small thing.
Lucian watched Calyrex's expression and waited.
From what he knew, Calyrex was not a cruel or selfish Pokémon. It was kind, and its history showed it, appearing before humans to bring fertility to their lands, and in the original course of events, using its power to relocate an entire forest to save the Pokémon living there before exhausting itself into sleep.
Calyrex's eyes went quiet as it thought. Fields stretching without end. Fortresses at peace. Humans and Pokémon living together.
Itself, honored as king of Galar, not as an object of fear but as a protector known and believed in.
The Pokémon League, it repeated. "You mean I hold the throne, and the League manages worldly affairs and maintains order?" "That is correct.
Calyrex would be Galar's true king, with the League as the practical instrument of governance.
Calyrex would become the League's protector and partner, inseparable from it.
The Galar region would become the second land in this world where humans and Pokémon genuinely coexisted as equals.
Calyrex had watched dynasties rise and fall.
It had seen humans tear each other apart for power across centuries. It had never seen a group like Lucian's, humans and Pokémon standing together, not for conquest or personal gain, but for something shared.
The hesitation in its eyes faded.
What replaced it was something older and steadier. "If you trust me with this," Calyrex said. A warm, fertile power spread from its body, pale yellow light moving gently through the air of the Lord's mansion, settling over the grass and trees like something soft and heavy at the same time.
"I agree."
That single word settled Galar's future.
Lucian stood.
"Before anything else, we need to address what is directly in front of us."
The mood in the room shifted. "You have sensed the unusual atmosphere on this land already. Patty 4 considers us a threat.
His forces are mobilizing, closing toward us, wanting to force a war."
Calyrex frowned. "Then drive them back."
"No," Lucian said.
"I have no interest in a pointless war. The people of this land have suffered enough. All they want is to eat and stay warm." He paused.
"From intelligence Chelsea has gathered, Patty 4 has been conducting forced conscription across the kingdom to build his army. The complaints from civilians and Pokémon alike are widespread. People are hiding, deserting, and increasing numbers are coming to Slumbering Town because they see it as the only place worth going.
Patty Ivy's army is likely already unstable.
Calyrex was quiet for a moment.
Then what do you need me to do?
When his main force arrives at the walls, show yourself. Let those soldiers see your power and your presence.
Promise that those who surrender will be spared. Offer land, food, and the end of conscription. Use the liberation of the common people and the enslaved as the basis for everything.
Lucian laid it out plainly.
When Galar changes hands, the ordinary people will not resist. Most of them will welcome it. Some will open the gates themselves. Calyrex's expression shifted into understanding. Its power was the power of fertility. It could bring spring to withered land and coax grain from ruined soil.
On a battlefield, it carried no sword or shield. But in the hearts of hungry, exhausted people, it was stronger than any army. You intend to use fertility to break their resolve.
Exactly, Lucian said.
The royal family gave them conscription, heavy taxes, hunger, and death.
We give them land, food, a stable life, and the chance to survive, humans and Pokémon both.
He looked out the window at Slumbering Town, the smoke of cooking fires, people and Pokémon moving through the streets together, young rice shoots growing in the fields.
Force takes fortresses. It cannot take hearts.
But when hearts turn, Galar falls before the battle begins.
Chelsea nodded.
The royal army is enormous on paper, but the bulk of it is conscripted civilians. They have no desire to fight.
They are only there because they fear the crown. Another minister added, show them a way out, and they will not die for the royal family. Calyrex looked at Lucian.
This human had the power to sweep through all of Galar.
He had chosen not to.
His concern was for the people and Pokémon of this land, not for victory.
I understand, Calyrex said.
When the enemy army reaches the walls, I will show them what a true king of abundance is.
Lucian's lips curved slightly. This battle would not run with blood.
But the old Galar would end here.
The new one would be born in fertility and in hope.
Several days later, the dust rose outside Slumbering Town under a bright sky.
Patty IV had run out of patience. The Unova outsider had been inside his territory long enough.
He issued the order, and the full Galar royal army advanced from 3 directions, east, south, and north, their formation stretching for over 10 miles, armor catching the light. In the air, the Corviknight Corps filled the sky from horizon to horizon.
It looked overwhelming from the outside. The generals on the inside knew better. The Kalos campaign had cost them their core army.
The retaliatory strike that crossed the ocean had inflicted casualties on the home garrison that had not been made good. What marched now was largely conscripted from the countryside, ordinary people who had not chosen to be here, who could not hold their weapons properly, whose complaints had been ongoing since the moment they were drafted. On the city wall, Lucian stood with his hands behind his back. Calyrex, Zacian, Zamazenta, and Curum stood beside him.
Hoopa had crept up the wall on its own and was peering over the edge with open curiosity. An envoy rode forward and shouted across the field. By order of His Majesty. The king leads this army personally.
Open the gates, surrender, confess your crimes, and mercy will be granted.
Resist, and Slumbering Town will be leveled, no one left alive. The silence on the wall was complete. Lucian looked at Calyrex. Your turn. Calyrex walked to the wall's edge.
It closed its eyes.
Golden light spread outward without sound.
Then a power of a different order descended over the battlefield, something that had no name in the vocabulary of war. The ground trembled, barely. Beneath the feet of the Galar army, the dry and cracked earth changed.
Grass pushed through.
Withered weeds turned green. Rice shoots sprouted along the roadside, grew, bloomed, and ripened in the time it took to draw a breath.
The entire wasteland became a sea of golden grain.
The smell of harvest filled the air.
Weapons hit the ground throughout the Galar ranks.
Soldiers stared.
This is a miracle. None of them had ever seen anything like it in their lives.
Lucian rode Kurum above the field, his voice clear and carrying.
I am Lucian, from a land called Unova. There, humans and Pokemon live as one. No one goes hungry. No one freezes. I did not come to Galar to invade. He let that settle. I came because your king imprisoned my trading fleet and gave me this city as compensation. I intended to use it as a port. What happened instead was that people from across Galar began arriving harem pale, thin, wearing rags. I understood then what life in this land was.
On the walls behind him, figures appeared, former refugees and escaped slaves from other cities, now wearing clean clothes, faces full of color and health.
They called down to the army below. Lord Lucian speaks the truth. He gave us houses and land. Everyone eats. Everyone is warm. Don't fight for the royals, they never treated us as human beings. The Galar army broke into noise.
Lucian spoke again, his voice carrying sorrow that was real.
The blood of Galar flows in your veins. We should not be killing each other. The royal family gave you war, famine, and death. Do you still want to die for that king? Put down your weapons. Come inside these walls. Join your families and friends. Here there is no slavery, no oppression. Everyone eats. Everyone has a home.
The silence beneath the walls lasted one moment.
Then it broke entirely. I don't want to fight, my mother and children are at home. We didn't harvest a single grain last year and the taxes still weren't forgiven. They drafted us here to die for them. Weapons fell. Spears were dropped. Shields were cast aside.
Soldiers looked up at the walls at the healthy, well-dressed people standing there and felt the wavering become something else. Patty IV watched from his chariot, his face going white and then rigid.
He slammed his fist down. Silence. Any man who breaks ranks will be executed.
His bodyguards moved immediately, cutting down the nearest soldiers who had dropped their weapons. Blood fell onto the newly sprouted grain.
It did not produce fear. It produced fury. The king kills his own men. Why should we die for him?
The formation collapsed.
Soldiers fled in every direction. Others turned on the bodyguards themselves. The army had not been defeated. It had come apart from within. Patty IV's voice cut through the chaos. Corbinite Legion, destroy the walls.
The formation overhead moved as one, iron wings tearing downward toward slumbering town.
Kurum. Kurum was already rising.
Its cold spread outward as it climbed, and the Corbinite core froze mid-dive, suspended solid in the air, and fell.
Lucian looked at Calyrex. Let them see who the true protector of Galar is. Calyrex raised its hand again.
The golden light spread further, but this time it did not grow grain. Across the battlefield, vines and grass wove upward in long arcs, forming a living shield between the soldiers fighting each other. The bodyguards' blades struck the vines and were turned aside without injury. The soldiers locked in combat were held, gently, apart.
Calyrex's voice moved across the land. I am the king of abundance. Every living thing on this land is under my protection. The royal family has treated the people as nothing. Lay down your weapons. There is land here, and food.
Those who stand with the tyrant will find no mercy. The remaining royal guards looked at each other.
The ordinary soldiers knelt. We surrender. We beg Lord Lucian for a way to live. The tide had turned. Chapter 260, Galar unifies. The tide had turned against Patty IV completely. He sat atop his golden chariot, his body shaking. The army he had assembled with everything at his disposal had collapsed in a single afternoon. Soldiers scattered and fled, bodyguards lay dead across the field, and the Corbinite Legion that had once filled the sky now lay in pieces on the ground below the walls, frozen solid and shattered. The royal banner had long since been trampled into the mud by the men who had carried it. Impossible, my army, how did this happen? He could not understand why the people of Galar would trust an outsider over their legitimate king.
He could not comprehend how a small port city, a collection of refugees, without a proper army, had become this.
Lucien looked at him from the wall.
No pity in his eyes. In the original course of history, the Galar royal family had stolen the credit for what Calyrex, Zacian, and Zamazenta had done during the darkest day, causing Calyrex to lose all belief in itself and fall into a 1,000-year sleep, its memories fading.
This outcome was simply the consequence of what they had always been. "Your Majesty, should we capture him?" Chelsea asked. Lucien shook his head slightly. True victory was not in taking the old king's head. It was in letting the old king live to see that every person who had once followed him had already turned away. Patty 4, abandoned, was already finished. Chelsea and several surrendered generals stepped forward and bowed. "Your Majesty, the army has fully surrendered. Should we march into the Galar interior immediately?" Lucien looked toward the distant fortresses. The Battle of Slumbering Town was not a defensive victory. It was the opening note of a new era for all of Galar. "No need to rush," he said. "The news will travel for us." And it did. Within 3 days, word of Calyrex's miracle, the army's collapse, and Patty IV's defeat had spread through every town and village in Galar. In Motostoke, farmers in the fields dropped their tools and wept. "Lord Lucien won. We won't pay those taxes anymore. They can't drag us off to war anymore." People ran to spread the news. Others stood at the edges of their fields and bowed toward the distant walls of Slumbering Town. In Winden, slaves in the workshops heard and threw down their tools where they stood. "The king is defeated. We're free." City guards who had always had divided loyalties opened the gates themselves, tore down the royal insignia, and threw it in the dirt. They waited for Lucien's army to arrive. Hammerlock, Circhester, Stowonside, one city after another, one village after another. Farmers, slaves, common soldiers, low-ranking clerks, all of them had endured enough. Enough taxes. Enough conscription. Enough hunger and separation from their families. And now they had seen something different. They had heard what Slumbering Town had become. "When Lord Lucien arrives, we'll welcome him properly. We'll guide his army through the gates ourselves. But corrupt officials, we've already tied them up and are waiting." People quietly sabotaged royal defenses from within. Others passed information. Others simply cleaned their doorways and prepared water and food and waited. Galar was no longer looking toward its old king. Every face was turned toward Slumbering Town. On the walls, Lucien watched the stream of people coming in from every direction, heard the distant cheering, and allowed himself a small smile. Calyrex stood beside him. The people's hearts have turned. The old Galar is already only a name. Zacian and Zamazenta stood to either side, their sword and shield radiating steady light. They understood what was coming. A new era. Not approaching. Already here. Lucien moved quickly. He restored order in Slumbering Town, settled the surrendered soldiers, and then set out under the straightforward purpose of liberating Galar from its old authority. Zacian and Zamazenta remained to guard Slumbering Town. Lucien rode out on Calyrex, Calyrex in its full form, mounted, its fertile aura moving across the land as they traveled. Where Calyrex passed, dry soil grew shoots, withered trees put out new leaves. More than half the army was made up of former royal soldiers who had surrendered. Now in clean uniforms, their eyes no longer held the despondency of conscripted men. They watched Calyrex's power work on the land around them and felt something settle in their chests. With that Pokémon present, their families would not go hungry. The first stop was a small farming town adjacent to Motostoke. Its people had lived under suffocating taxation for as long as anyone could remember, more than half of every harvest taken by the crown, people going hungry, farm Pokémon treated badly. When Lucien's column arrived outside the walls, there was no resistance. The gates were already open. The townspeople were already in the streets. Elderly farmers leaning on hoes, eyes red. Children in worn but clean clothes watching the legendary Pokémon with wide eyes. Even the royal guards who had been stationed in the town stood at the front of the crowd, their weapons already set aside. Lord Lucian, the King of Abundance has come. We're saved, we won't starve anymore. An old farmer, gray-haired and bent, walked forward through the crowd with shaking steps and bowed deeply. My lord, we have waited for this day a long time. The royal officials are already gone. We submit to you willingly, and ask you to be the Lord of Galar. The entire town knelt without hesitation. Rise, Lucian said, moving through the crowd to help people to their feet. No one will bully you again. He looked at Calyrex. Calyrex extended a hand, and fertile energy spread across the barren fields surrounding the town. Seedlings pushed through the soil in moments, green and strong. The villagers stared with open mouths. Several old farmers stood and spoke up. Lord Lucian, we know every road in this area. We will guide your army to the other towns still under the royal family's control. Lucian bent and helped the nearest farmer to his feet. In half a day, the town had been brought into the new order without fire or suffering, filled only with relief and anticipation. The column moved on. Town after town, the pattern held. In Winden, the great mechanized city, whose miners and workers had toiled day and night for wages that barely kept them alive, where farm Pokémon were shackled and conscripted, the defending generals had already fled on hearing news of the defeated slumbering town. The nobles had sold their possessions and run. When Lucian's column arrived, the city gates had already been broken open from the inside by the miners themselves. The royal banners had been torn down. The officials who had not escaped were bound and waiting. The workers poured into the streets. Lord Lucian, come in. Come in quickly. Lucian looked at the faces pressing around him. From today, Winden abolishes all royal taxes and levies. Workers are paid according to their labor. All conscripted Pokémon are released. People and Pokémon work together and share in the city's prosperity. The city erupted. The residents cleared away every trace of the old authority before nightfall. In Hulbury, a port city, the people had used their fishing boats to blockade the harbor and drive out the royal guards themselves before the column arrived. They guided the procession in through the water. In the farming villages along the terraced hillsides, the roads had been cleared and the crops tended in preparation. Elders knelt in the fields to greet the column. In Hammerlock, the ancient city, 1,000 years old, where the royal family and their garrison had intended to hold their strongest position, the people opened the gates from within before the army reached the walls. The guards scattered. The citizens came out into the streets carrying food. Bologna, Circhester, Stow-on-Side. Every town, every village. The same scene repeated, royal flags knocked down, officials captured or fled, not one city willing to spend lives defending the old order. Commoners, farmers, miners, and the lowest-ranking soldiers joined the column as guides and led it to the next town. In the fields, farmers stood at the edges of their plots each day watching for the column's dust on the horizon. In the villages, food and water were prepared and waiting. In the cities, streets were cleared and windows thrown open. In under 2 months, more than half of Galar's territory was free. The old royal authority had collapsed entirely. Lucian stood on the upper terrace of Hammerlock Castle and looked down at the crowd gathered below, farmers, miners, workers, former soldiers, people who had traveled from distant towns to be present. Calyrex stood beside him. In the 3 months since the campaign had begun, Calyrex had released its fertile power over every town it entered. By now, nearly every person in Galar knew the name King of Abundance. The power of faith that had accumulated around Calyrex had grown to something that neither of them had fully anticipated. Calyrex, standing there, still processed the reality of it as something that should not have been possible and yet was. Lucian looked out across the crowd, then spoke. People of Galar. For hundreds of years, the old royal family levied exorbitant taxes, treated every living being as expendable, let you go hungry, and enslaved Pokémon without limit, leaving this land hollowed out and broken. From today, that rule is over. The crowd went silent for one moment. Then the roar came, cheers and shouts and the waving of farming tools and flowers, hundreds of years of accumulated suffering finding its release all at once. Paddy Ivy's dynasty had lost its last footing.
The word overcarried everything that every person present had been waiting to hear. When the noise had subsided, Lucien spoke again.
The old order is gone. A new one takes its place.
I declare the Galar Region Pokémon League officially founded.
Murmurs moved through the crowd.
Confusion, curiosity, but underneath both, trust. Whatever Lord Lucien established, it would be something worth having.
Lucien explained it plainly. Galar will have no royal lineage and no royal authority.
The Pokémon League is Galar's sole governing body, staffed by trainers from Unova working alongside the people of Galar to manage this land.
The League will abolish all excessive taxes and levies, divide land and tools so that farmers have fields and workers have wages, abolish slavery in all its forms, and ensure that no person may oppress another.
Humans and Pokémon stand as equals, supporting one another, protecting this land together. He paused, and looked at Calyrex beside him. The King of Abundance, Calyrex, will serve as guardian of Galar, above the League, a protector who blesses every living thing on this land. That wraps up this part of What If Transmigrated to a Medieval Pokémon World.
Thanks so much for listening.
As always, new parts drop every 4 days, so be sure to stay tuned.
Quick reminder.
The series What If Transmigrated to a Medieval Pokémon World is now on hold, since we've caught up with the author.
So now, I need your help picking the next project for the channel. I'm currently deciding between these 3 fanfics. What if creating the strongest Strawhat crew by reading manga?
What if Reincarnated in Bleach as Toshiro Hitsugaya?
What if Reborn in Naruto World, continuation? Please vote in the poll and let me know which story you'd like to see next. I'll take the top pick and start working on that series next.
Also check out my Patreon channel for early releases of all the series, where you can find all the series released one day ahead of YouTube. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, subscribe, share it with your friends, and please consider supporting the original author as well.
See you in the next one.